Welcome, Kevin, to the Anti-Alienation Project. Um, it has been a long time coming, this
Yes, it has.
conversation.
Yeah. Life is crazy. We've been going back and forth a few times to make the interview happen, but we made it happen. So here we are.
We made it happen. Here we
Yep.
are, and I can't wait to hear your story. I've
Yeah,
seen I've seen you post on a few of the group pages for Parental Alienation on Facebook, and I can tell you just have this desire to help others, desire to share your story, and hopefully
definitely.
give some people some insight into what it's like for the child's point of view. So,
Yeah, I mean that's really why I'm here. When it comes to these kinds of dynamics, I think that the shared stories are really, really powerful. I believe in awareness, and if my story is helpful for any children who have gone through this, people who are going through this, parents, adults, whatever it happens to be, then I'm more than happy to share. When it comes to my story, the way that if you want to talk about the rules of engagement for it, so to speak, I
mm,
like to say that in the stories of life, there are no heroes and there are no villains. As easy as it is sometimes to make heroes out of parents that are alienated from their kids or make villains out of the parents doing the alienating. For me, the way that I think about it is in the story of my life, there are no heroes and there are no villains. There are just people who do things. And there are people who do things for a wide variety of very complex reasons. But the result of the actions that certain people took in my life is that there was a little boy who got hurt very, very badly. And that was me. And so that's what we'll talk about tonight if you just want me to get right into it.
yes. So one question I have before we get
Sure.
started, and for anyone who's just now joining, please, if you feel called to help us get this in the algorithm, get our message out about parental alienation. It's always helpful to share the video or to like the video, and then more people will learn about this, what this is, and hear Kevin's message tonight. So you were alienated from your dad. If you could just give the facts real quick, like
Yeah.
from what age to what
Yep.
age?
Yep. So it actually happened a few times, and it started when I was 3 years old. So my earliest memories from childhood involve my dad, and they're all good. My dad and I were very, 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 very close up until about age 3. And I have some very, very, very specific memories of times with him that were very, very good. Weirdly specific stuff that I now remember. But the way that I remember this is one day I just woke up and my dad wasn't there. That's literally what happened. And come to find out, my mom and my dad had a lot of conflict in their marriage, and my mom, when things would get heated, would leave, and she would take me with her. So this happened a few times where they would have a fight, and out of nowhere, my mom would just grab me and would leave. And then eventually, they divorced, and from that point, that's when really the stories began about my dad. Now, the funny thing about it is going back and sort of remembering this, the first things that my mom told me about my dad actually were not that he was abusive or that he was a drunk or that he was a child molester or any of the other things that she would tell me later, by the way. It started with her telling me that he was going to kidnap me. That's where it started. I would ask to see him or would ask to spend more time with him. And my mom would respond by screaming at me, yelling at me, and telling me that my dad was going to come in the night and was going to kidnap me and was going to take me far, far away where I would never see her or my little brother or any of my family again. And when I would get really worked up over this and would cry, she would call a social worker and she would use that to say, this boy's afraid of his father. I think his father may have done something to him. And so it really started at that age, but it continued really throughout my whole life. There were moments when I would have visitations with my dad, and those were normal and good. But it was almost like living a double life because it was almost like with my dad, I could be one person. And then when I would come home, my mom would proceed to tell me things about my dad. Again, things that were really inconsistent with the man that I knew him to be. Um, she told me he was violent. She told me that he had beaten her when they were together, and that's why they had divorced. At a certain point, she began to tell me that he had molested me when I was a child. And eventually, when I got old enough to start questioning that, she would tell me that he had molested, other children, but not me, things like that. Now, what you have to understand, and this is where telling these stories can get really, really difficult, is that you have to think about this through the eyes of a child, okay? Because as an adult, as I'm telling this, it obviously sounds ridiculous, right? Like your dad to be this person, and your mom is telling you all this stuff. Like, why can't you just say, Mom, you're full of it? A child's brain doesn't operate that way. Children are very, very, very malleable, and the really sad thing is, it is not that hard to brainwash a kid. It's not that hard. Kids will believe all kinds of things, and they're very, very, very malleable. I mean, it's easy to get kids to believe in Santa Claus or all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And as a child, all you know is that you have a mom and you have a dad, and you love them both, and you trust them both. But your mom is telling you one thing, and your experience is telling you something else, and your brain is just trying to make sense of all of this.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So does that answer the question?
Well, so you mentioned that you had an off and on relationship with your dad.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah. So basically when when he and my mom divorced, I was about three. And at that point, my mom started to throw out some pretty wild allegations against him. And unfortunately, my mom had access to a lot of money that my dad did not have access to. And she was able to hire a lot of lawyers. And what's interesting about this is I found this out much, much, much later in life. But actually, the reason why my parents divorced in the first place, it didn't involve any allegation of abuse. It didn't involve any of that.
mm,
My mother suffered from a mental disorder called Munchausen's by proxy.
mm,
And basically, what that means is that she believed that people around her were sick when they were not. And she had to put herself into the role of the caregiver to receive validation. And so, with me, from the time I was pretty young, she had started over medicating me. And her two favorite medications were albuterol for asthma and corticosteroids like prednisone. And she used to actually crush up prednisone and put it in my breakfast cereal and put like coffee creamer on it to disguise the taste. And my dad is a very, very, very smart man. My dad is very, very, very intelligent. And he figured out pretty quickly what was going on and tried to convince my mother to get help. And she responded by leaving him. So that's what actually happened. It took
and I'm so
me,
sorry.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's now again, you have to think about this though through the eyes of a kid. As a kid, you don't get this. If your mom says take the medicine, you take the medicine. And that's actually where the child abuse label first began to be applied to my dad. My mother would say, because he's not giving Kevin the medication that he needs, he's abusing him. So that's how the label first began to be used. And then gradually that turned into he's a child molester, he's a wife beater, he's a child beater, he's the scum of the earth. At a certain point, even my mom got really, really, really religious, and it almost took on like a religious bend. She would tell me that my father was possessed by the devil. At a certain point, she would tell me that. If my dad would give me like gifts from when we had been on visitations together, my mom would take those away and would say, "No, you can't have that. Like that's ungodly. You can't have that." And it really does a number on a kid. you know, you're trying to make sense of all of this, and I will say that if you want to kind of divide this up into time blocks, my parents divorced when I was three. That's kind of when the brainwashing began, and that kind of I didn't really have a lot of contact with my dad until I was about six. Then he actually ended up getting we ended up getting a pretty good caseworker, a pretty good social worker who spent time with my dad, and she said, "Look, I've never seen a hint of evidence that this man is malicious in any way. And so because of that, my dad was able to get what you would consider to be more regular visitations with my little brother and I. And at that point, this is where the story actually gets kind of cool. My dad at this point lived in Kansas City, and my brother and I lived with our mom in Columbia, which is about 2 hours from Kansas City. And my dad bought this plot of land about 20 minutes outside of Columbia. and began to build a house out there because he wanted to live closer to my brother and I. And that's where we would have visitations. And his dream was to turn that into a place where we could become men, where we could learn life skills and where we could spend time with him, sort of away from all of the garbage that we were going through at home. And from about age 6 to about age 12, I have a lot of really, really good memories with my dad. Those visitations were incredible. He made me feel safe. He knew me better than anybody. He knew me very, very, very well. And nobody is perfect, though. I will say that. And sometimes what would happen is, and you could hardly blame the man. I mean, if you're getting these kinds of allegations thrown out against you that are not true, you would be forgiven for losing your temper once in a while. So did my dad sometimes, call my mom up on the phone and yell at her? Yeah. But when he would do that though, then my mom was able to go, oh, see, here's what I'm talking about. Like that's what it is. And unfortunately, when I was about 12, I was on visitation with my dad, with my brother. And around this time, my little brother, who's 2 years younger than me, had developed kind of an unhealthy fascination with fire. He would get a hold of like matches or candles and he would burn things. And he got a hold of a candle, and my dad had been working on this house, this cabin, and my little brother had lit a portion of it on fire. He'd lit it on fire. And in that moment, I saw my dad do something that I had never seen him do in my life. He grabbed my little brother, and with an open hand, he hit him. Now, what you have to understand is I'm not saying that's right. But what I am saying is it was the only time I ever saw anything like that happen. But my mom had already loaded the cannon, is the
Right.
expression I like to use. And when I saw that, there's fire, there's chaos. Your brother is crying, yelling, dad's yelling. It's chaotic. And when I saw that, there was a part of me that went, oh, okay, so this is what mom's talking about. Okay. And so what did I do with that? Well, I went home and I sat on it for a couple of days. And then I said to my mom, I have something to tell you. Dad hit Kelly this weekend. And what did my mom do with that? She said, okay, tell me the story of how this happened. And so I told her exactly what happened. And then she said, that's not the first time this has happened, is it? No, I want you to tell me about the other times this happened. No, mom, this is the only time it happened. I don't think you're telling me the truth. Tell me the truth. Did it happen other times? Yeah, mom, it happened other times. Okay. Was your father drinking when this happened? No, no, mom, he wasn't. No, no, no. He used to drink all the time. He had a problem with that. He was drinking when he did this, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, mom. And he didn't use an open hand, did he? He used a fist, didn't he? Tell me, actually show me how he used a fist on your brother. And he's hit you before too, hasn't he? And she did this with me for weeks. And eventually, when the story got to the point where she wanted it, she put me in front of a lawyer and a judge, and I accused my father of child abuse, which he was not guilty of. And that broke me. Now, when that happened, what I now understand is I had been developing PTSD for a while from this experience, but that was the final straw. And when that happened, something in my brain changed. And all of those good memories that I described of my dad went away.
Mm.
And I didn't have access to them. Or if I did have access to them, I didn't have any emotional connection to them. There's something called emotional amnesia that can happen.
Mhm.
And what I now understand about the dynamic is essentially when I stood in front of a court and accused my father of that, I was killing him off in my mind. That's what I was doing.
Mm.
And that was heartbreaking. Now, my dad did not stop fighting. And at that point, there were court ordered family therapy sessions with a family therapist. And at the time, I did what just about any kid who is going through an alienation dynamic does. I fought it with everything I had. I went in there and I remember, going into those sessions and saying the most hateful things about my dad that you can imagine. I mean, I told him I hated him. I told him I wanted him dead. I told him, I said absolutely awful things about him. And he never once retaliated, not once. You know, he was calm. He said, Kevin, I know you don't mean that. Um, you know, and it was actually in that session where that particular therapist, his name is Greg Sisk, he figured this out in about a month and a half. After about a month and a half of these court ordered family therapy sessions, he went before the court and he said, these kids have been brainwashed.
Wow.
That's literally what he said. Now, unfortunately, again, my mom had access to a lot of money and a lot of lawyers. And at that point, she had a team of 3 lawyers working for her who tore this poor counselor up and kind of shredded his testimony about all this. And these family therapy sessions went on until I was about 17. And then at that point, my dad actually almost out of mercy said, you know, these kids have had enough. I'm gonna back off, you know, was what he did. And from about 17 to 18, I didn't have any contact with him at all. Um, Now, what's interesting about this is it's interesting how your subconscious, your unconscious, you know, it's going to come to the surface somehow. And with me, the way that that happened is when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, I had a full ride scholarship to go to a university in Chicago to study. And at the last minute, I turned it down. And I said, no, you know, actually, I think I'm going to go to the University of Missouri in Columbia, which again, I now at the time, I had no idea why I was making that decision. I did it at the last minute. It was a spur of the moment thing. But when I rolled up into Columbia, the first place that I went to was the land. It
Wow.
20 minutes outside. And I didn't know why I was going there. I just went there. And it continued to be a place where I would continue to go back to it again and again and again and again, even though I fervently believed that my father was a monster who had abused me.
Wow.
I kept going. And now, and again, I never stopped to ask if this place was such a hellhole for you, why do you keep going back? You know, that's not what people with PTSD don't go back to the places where the bad thing happened. They avoid those places. Now, with me, there was some avoidance, but it was actually avoidance of my dad. So he would call me up, and I would find an excuse not to see him or an excuse not to talk to him. You know, and he would badger me a little bit. You know, I'm your dad. I'm not going to be around forever. You know, come see me. Write me a letter. You know, those things. And I remember at one point in particular, I was 19, 20. I was doing my studies at Mizzou. Out of the blue, my dad just called me up and he said, you know, I haven't seen you in a while. Just let me take you out to breakfast, you know? And I said, all right, Dad, I'll let you do that. And he took me out, but the spot that he took me to was this spot where we would get dropped off for visitations. And we always ate breakfast there. It was the exact same spot. And that was where he took me, and we just sat down and ate breakfast together. And it was almost like, this is so hard to describe, but it was almost like there was this space, this wall
Yeah.
between us where it was almost like I was numb to him. I didn't hate him, but I just didn't feel anything at all. And now, in spite of going through all this, I grew up. And in spite of the difficulties of childhood, I grew up. Eventually, I made the decision to go into ministry because I wanted to help people. And I became a pastor. I went and got my master's in divinity in St. Louis. I got married to a wonderful woman that I love dearly, who has been just a rock through all of this. I mean, we were married for 10 years. Well, it's kind of like, hey, honey, there's some stuff I got to tell you that's like that
Wow.
you don't know about, you know, and she's been so wonderful through it. We've got 3 amazing kids. And, you know, in spite of all of the challenges, I grew up and have a pretty good life. But what never stopped, I guess, haunting me is the word that I would use, was this feeling of loss, this feeling like I had lost something, this feeling of sadness. And when it would really come out, it would really come out when I would get a day off. And I wouldn't really have anything to keep myself entertained. I wouldn't have anything to keep myself busy. I didn't have any distractions. That was when those feelings really began to come out. One question that I get a lot, I'm sure people are going to ask, is how did you figure all this out? And that's what I'll get into now, unless you have any questions about anything that I've just kind of said.
Well,
I know that's a lot.
I I do have a few questions if you don't
Sure.
mind,
No, go ahead.
before we get into that point. Um, you've just shared a lot, so a lot
Yeah,
comes to my
that's a
mind.
lot.
Um, and you talked about the false allegations, and
Oh
you
yeah.
mentioned the Munchausen by proxy.
Yep.
Um, I guess on the Munchausen by proxy point, I was wondering if that continued and
Oh yeah.
until
It
what
did, yeah.
age?
So it did. So my mom worked in healthcare. She was a nurse, like a lot of people with Munchausen's are. And it was one of those things, again, it's almost like playing detective. You know, you start as you get older, there are some things that you start to see that don't really add up. And it really started with me seeing the way that my mom medicated herself.
Okay.
She would carry around just bags and bags and bags and bags of medicine anytime we went anywhere. And the only thing that I knew for sure that she had was lupus. She did have lupus, like that was true. But after growing up, I had known other people who suffered from that, and they did not have medication to the extent that my mother did. I mean, it was a lot of medication. And I remember when I really started to question, my mom's kind of medical knowledge of things. I remember again, I was in college, I was in my 20s, and out of nowhere, my mom called me up and she said, "Oh, Kevin, I've got really, really bad news. The dog has lupus." So we had a little cocker spaniel, and I said, "Mom, that's crazy. I was just home 6 months ago. That dog was fine." And she said, "No, no, 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 no. Like I know what lupus looks like, and that dog has lupus."
Oh
And I
man.
said, "Well, did you take the dog to the vet?" And she kind of got angry with me, and she was like, "What are you talking about?" "No, I know what lupus looks like. We're going to take care of the dog." And what ended up happening is she gave the dog prednisone. The dog blew up to the size of a balloon and died. So she ended up killing the family dog. Now, it took me a while to figure out that that's actually what had happened, but that's what happened. And it was also just kind of seeing the way that she desperately needed to be the caretaker. Now, my mom had a lot of other issues too. She lied a lot. And the thing about her, though, is it's hard to say that she was a malicious liar because she believed what she was saying. To her, that was her reality. She believed things about reality that were not true.
Yeah.
In her mind, my dad really was the devil. And the thing that we now know about parental alienation is that parents that are doing alienating are often reliving their trauma through their kids somehow. They're projecting that. And my mother was adopted. And so my mom, when she did eventually find her birth family, but when she found them, the guy that her dad ended up being a real letdown. He was not a good guy, and I think that some of that was she was projecting that into my experience somehow, so, but yeah, it continued her whole life, up until the point that she died. She died 4 years ago of a heart attack. And my personal belief is that that was because of just too many medications. With corticosteroids, that's what that'll do. It'll damage your heart long term, and I think that's what happened. So,
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up.
yeah,
I've been interviewing people and doing research on this for 2 years, and I've seen a big overlap between those who have a delusional belief about the other parent, as well as a
yep,
delusional belief about the medical reality of their
yeah,
children. And Munchausen
definitely,
by proxy seems to be a very common thing that these parents also do to their children. And I think it's tricky because they isolate the kid and they're able to get away with more of that because they've isolated the kid.
yep.
So I feel for you a lot. Do you think you could give a little bit of an explanation or a frame the dynamic between you and your mom?
Yeah. So this is where this gets really tricky because what I realized pretty quickly when all of this came to the surface
Hmm.
is that I had some very, very, very positive, affectionate, loving feelings towards my dad that were severely repressed. And I had some feelings of absolute hatred for my mom that were also severely repressed. And I had to get all that out. And so that was part of this whole process. I mean, my recommendation for anybody going through this, whether you're an adult survivor, a parent, find yourself a really good therapist because you are not prepared to deal with the extremities of emotion that you're going to feel when you're going through this. But eventually, once I kind of worked through all that, and it was almost like going through the stages of grief. They talk about that, the depression and then the anger and the bargaining and all of those things. I got to a point of forgiveness with my mother. I did. And the way that I was able to do that is eventually I came to see that she was not a terrible person. And I actually do have good memories with her. I do. I'll tell you a few good things about her. She was a very talented musician. That was actually authentically her. She was very, very gifted. I mean, if you put a piano in front of this woman, she could play anything. She was a very, very good singer. And on that point, we could connect. I play guitar. I love music. And so when it came to music, she and I could talk. And I have a lot of good memories of those conversations with my mom talking about, Jimi Hendrix and the music of the 60s that she grew up with and those kinds of things. I loved that. My mom was a very charismatic person. I mean, when she was younger, she was drop dead gorgeous. Blonde hair, blue eyes. She looked like something out of, like a California Surfer Girls video or something. I mean, she was absolutely stunning and she had charisma. And that was actually part of what made her such a good alienator. She could make you believe anything. I mean, she was so convincing in how she would do things. And in the right framework, she could have actually been very, very good at, team building or management or something like that, where you have to influence people in that way. She could have been very good at that. But unfortunately, it went in a very dark direction, that kind of side of her personality. Um, the real challenge with my mom and I is I think deep down inside, she knew that there was a part of me that was never going to fully reject my dad, and not fully. And she resented that. So for that reason, there always was that friction between us. She would even say at times when, if I would get angry at her, she would say, "Now you're reminding me of your father right now." She would say things like that, and as if like, my father was just the worst thing that you could be, and you better not be that. Well, you can't separate yourself from your father, but you also can't separate yourself from your mom either. So I think that for somebody going through this, you could very easily create a problem for yourself by rejecting your alienating parent. You don't want to do that either because that's just as bad. You are your mom and you are your dad. They both make up the person that is you. And the harm that comes from parental alienation is that it forces a kid to deny a part of themselves. And so once I was able to work through those feelings of anger and resentment, I went to my mom's grave, and she was buried in Missouri. When I made kind of my first big trip back home to reconnect with my dad, one of the things that I did was I went to her grave. I didn't go to her funeral. When she died, we hadn't spoken in 2 years,
Oh, wow.
and that really that happened because of when I started to have kids of my own. I began to see her trying to influence them in a certain way, and that protective, Papa Bear kind of came out of me. And when you set boundaries with a narcissist, which my mom was also that, they don't like that. And so when that happened, she kind of wrote me off, and I said, okay. And then unfortunately, she died before we had a chance to resolve or reconnect or any of those things. So does that make sense?
Oh, everything you're saying is like right out of my life too. So I totally
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I do have one question
Sure.
just to really talk about what it's like for the child going through it. So for anyone, I'm sure you know this, but for anyone who might be new to this topic, if you convince a child one of their parents is bad, they usually internalize that and come to believe they're not good enough or they're bad too. So what can happen is that plays out throughout that child's teenagers, young adults' life with different self-destructive effects. Did you notice any of that as you grew up?
Yeah. So one of the really interesting things about this is when I reconnected with my dad, I was going through a bunch of his old stuff, and I actually found some tape recordings of me when I was a little boy. The earliest one was from like 1988, and they were interviews with somebody that I assume is like a court-appointed social worker or a psychologist or something. And I listened to those tape recordings once, which was really, really triggering for me. But once I had listened to them once, I kind of handed them over to my therapist and said, if I keep these, I'm just going to obsess over this. I really need you to kind of hang on to these for me. And based on some of the behavior that I was showing just on those recordings, it's pretty obvious that I was developing PTSD by the time I was 4 or 5 years old. That was really when that started. And I think that comes from a place where if you can convince a child that they're not safe with one of their parents, that that's an unsafe place to be, that's deeply, deeply traumatizing, especially if it's not true. Even if it is true, it's traumatizing. But especially if it's not true, that makes it even more traumatizing because then the kid is put into a situation where, okay, this parent that I'm supposed to trust is telling me I'm not safe with this parent, but I feel safe here. So what's going on over here? Am I really not safe over here? And it really deprives them of that sense of security and safety that a kid should have. And so that manifested itself in a lot of different ways as I got older. The biggest thing it was in the area of memory, and you can kind of understand why that would be when you're forcing a kid to kind of block out certain parts of their memory. That's going to manifest itself in adulthood. And with me, it looked a lot like ADHD. That's what it looked like. As it turns out, I don't have ADHD at all. It's PTSD from this kind of thing. But and then of course PTSD manifests itself in all kinds of different ways. I mean, I had a lifetime of migraine headaches and stomach issues
Oh, yeah.
and those kinds of things. Now, I will say though that the really incredible thing is since reconnecting with my dad, I was on medication for migraines. I was on medication for ADHD. I was on medication for hormonal imbalances and a handful of other things. I'm off of all of it.
Yeah.
And I feel great. I feel better than I ever have in my whole life.
Yeah.
Since reconnecting with my dad, and that was 7 months ago, I haven't had a single migraine. And a lot of those things are radically, radically reduced. It's not perfect yet because the recovery process from PTSD can take a long time,
Mhm.
and we're still working through some of those things. But just that initial release of, oh, okay, so that's what happened to you. That was enough to really get me a lot of relief. So, does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely. Yes, it makes absolute sense to me,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah,
So can we go back to when I think we left off around the age of 19 or 20 when you were in
yeah,
college?
yeah.
So,
So, yeah, so at that point, my dad was desperately trying to reconnect to me.
mm,
And he did that in a variety of ways, letters, phone calls. He did that through like spontaneously, showing up and trying to visit with me and those sorts of things. And I would avoid him. I would always find a reason to not write him or not call him unless I absolutely had to. If he would do this thing where he would call and call and call and call and call until I finally would like pick up, and then he would kind of chew me out a little bit, but not too bad. But he would say, you really need to, call me more often. And I think that the challenge for him is that he knew exactly what was going on. I mean, my dad's a very, very smart man, but at the same time, he also wanted me to have a relationship with my mom. He desperately wanted me to have that. And I don't think he was fully aware of just how much dishonesty I was being fed. I think he knew there was some of that going on, but I don't think he knew the full extent of it at all. And so he was kind of blindsided by some of this. But eventually, when I grew up and began to have kids of my own and that sort of thing, I just sort of wrote everybody off. I said, okay, don't need my dad, he's no good, but don't need my mom either, she's no good. So I'm just going to do this my own way, okay? And I just sort of cut everybody out of my life and said, I'm just better off without them, and this is what I'm going to do. And that was kind of how I lived my life. When I reconnected with my dad recently, we hadn't spoken in I think 12 years.
oh wow.
And based on our reconnection, I was able to facilitate a reconnection between my little brother and him. And he and my little brother hadn't spoken in like 25 years. So it had been a lot longer for them. And so I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry, I lost I lost my place there. What was I talking about?
No,
It
you were just
was
you were talking about how you got married and
oh
then
yeah. Okay. So that was really I had kind of cut him out of my life at that point. And in spite of, all of the challenges of childhood that I've grown up and I felt like I had done well for myself, but there were still these, I guess, these emotions, these residual emotional effects that were coming out from that I didn't even know were linked to that. I had no idea. And the way that this would usually come out is, ministry is hard and it takes a lot out of you and it takes a lot of time. And most of the time, I was able to sort of distract myself by just working at kind of a breakneck pace.
Mm.
But anytime that I had a day off and I had to just kind of sit with myself where I didn't have anything to distract me, I would get really, really sad. And I would have these feelings of almost like loss that would come up, like I had lost something or I had left something undone, or like I was stuck, was kind of how it felt. And finally, one day after a particularly bad weekend, I said to my wife, I said, "Honey, I think I need to talk to somebody about this to try to work through this." Now, what was crazy about this was one of the questions I get the most is, "How in the world did you discover the truth?"
Wow.
And what I can say is, I believe in God, and I believe this was the most spiritual experience I've ever been through by far. Nothing compares to it. Even if you don't necessarily align with that belief system, you can at least understand if you've gone through something like this and you finally do kind of discover the truth, you have that aha moment. It was almost like, the universe was saying to me, yes, this is right. This is the right move. Keep doing this. This is what you need to be doing. Um, so I went to therapy, having no idea that any of this was kind of locked back from my childhood. And when I first went in, my wife said, "How do you feel about talking to a Jewish rabbi?" And I said, "It sounds like a lot of fun. Let's do that." I don't know any rabbis. That would be great. And that was the first time I met my therapist. His name's Rabbi Roll. He's a very, very good guy. And we sat down together, and he said, "Tell me why you're here. Tell me what's going on." And I started to describe all these feelings that I was having. And I thought we were going to talk about like the stress of ministry and spending time with hospice patients and how that can wear on you and those sorts of things. I really did think that's what we were going to talk about. And he just kind of let me talk for probably 30 minutes. And then he just puts his hand up and he goes, "Kevin, stop." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I know what's wrong with you. Would you like to know?"
Wow.
And I said, "That's definitive. Like, you know me for a half an hour, He said, "No, no, 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 no. I know what's wrong with you. This is what you have to understand, Kevin." And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, "You have a soul, and that soul was given to you by God. And that soul is eternal, it never ends. But inside of that soul is every single person that you've ever been and every single person that you'll ever be. And at a certain point in your life, there was a kid that felt isolated and alone and angry and sad and stuck. And you never got past that. You need to go find that kid
Mm.
and you need to allow him to say the things that he has never been allowed to say. Until you do that, your soul is going to bleed. And that's what you're experiencing right now." And I'm listening to this and I'm going, this sounds like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I almost walked out and he was like, "No, no, 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 no. You need to sit down." And he said, "Here's what we're going to do. I want you to try this." And he laid me down on his couch and he said, "I want you to pick a memory where you felt these feelings that you're feeling now and try to make it as early as you can." I said, "All right." So I picked a really specific memory and he kind of put me into this place of relaxation. And I started to feel something. And I couldn't really describe it, but it was like, oh my gosh, okay, so I'm feeling something and I don't really know what this is, and I don't really know how to describe this, And then he kind of stopped and he said, "Okay, we're gonna stop this today, but what I want you to do is I want you to wait 3 or 4 days, and then I want you to do this again. But this time I want you to make sure that you're with people that you feel safe with, because sometimes when you have things locked away in your unconscious, when it comes out, it can be kind of messy." And I'm thinking, like, how bad could this possibly be
Oh
at that
no.
point? Yeah. And so I did exactly what he said. But he added something. He said, "This time, try to see if you can get that kid to talk to you." And I
Mm.
said, "Okay, so like the kid version of me is going to talk to the adult version of me." He said, "Exactly. See if you can get him to open up to you." And I said, "All right." And so I waited 3 or 4 days, and then I picked a specific time. The kids had gone to bed, and I said, "Okay, honey, I'm going to go into this bedroom and I'm going to try this, and we'll see how this works." And she's like, "Okay." And so I laid myself down. I picked the same memory, and I remember pretty clearly. Visualization is pretty powerful. But I saw myself as a kid, and I was 12 years old, and I went up to that kid, and I said, anything that you've got to say, you say it to me, okay? Because I'm going to keep you safe. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to shame you. Anything that you need to say, you say it to me because I am safe. And I swear this is true.
Mhm.
In my head, it was almost like I didn't have control over it. That little kid reached up and kind of grabbed me by the head and pulled my head down like that and whispered into my ear, I miss my dad.
Oh.
And as soon as that, I swear this is true. As soon as that happened, it was like, later on, my wife, she thought I had been shot because of the sound that came out of me. It was like a wounded animal. It was just like all of a sudden, all of these memories that I had lost came pouring back into my head all at once, and I could see clearly. And I was sobbing. I was crying so, so, so hard. And I cried out and I said, honey, I need you. Come in here. And she comes in there and she grabs me. I was shaking and I couldn't talk for a solid probably 45 minutes. And then finally I looked up at her and I said, honey, I've got some things to tell you that I've never told a soul. And I proceeded to tell her the story that I told you tonight. And the next couple of days were rough. There was a lot of crying, and a lot of processing. And finally, I said, okay, I got to call my dad. And I did. And it was incredible. We hadn't spoken in 12 years. And he's just, Kevin. And I said, Dad, I know you're happy to talk to me, but I need you to just listen right now because I need to tell you what happened. And I told him about all of this, and he was crying, he was sobbing, and he said, Kevin, you have never been far from me. You've never been far from me. And when he said that, I just broke down and I said, Dad, I love you. I've always loved you. And it was incredible. And about 2 weeks later, I got on a plane in the middle of a blizzard so I could go see him. I mean, it was like everybody, I live in Maryland and I had to go back to Kansas City to see him. Everybody was saying, like, you don't get on a plane. It's dangerous. I said, nope, nope, nope. Like, I'm into this. I'm seeing my dad. And I got on a plane right in the middle of a blizzard and I got down there and reconnected with him, just spent a lot of time with him. When I saw him, I mean, it was just
Yeah,
instant,
what
like,
was that like when you saw
I
him?
went up, I literally went up to him and I grabbed his face and I was like, Dad, I love you. And we are so, 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 so good. And he looked back at me and he said, Kevin, I never had any doubt that we were good, and it was just incredible. It was funny, even like when I got to Kansas City, it was like 2.5 feet of snow on the ground. And my cousin Ron, who's actually a lot more like a big brother to me, was around and he's got a big truck that can get through just about anything. And I said, I'm here. We've got to go back to the land. We have to go there. And he said, Kevin, we're never getting in there. And I said, yes, we are. We're going. So we literally all piled into the truck and we went down to the same land and like the cabin was still there. Like it was falling apart. It was absolutely falling apart. Like the
Oh,
roof had caved in. And this is the really incredible part. I got inside. Like I had to like climb the wall to get into it. And when I got into this old cabin, there were all of these pictures all over the wall of me and my dad when I was little. I mean, it was like something out of like a novel or something. I mean, I posted a lot of the pictures that I posted on some of the Facebook groups are from that. It was from seeing that. There was a picture of me like up on my dad's shoulder when I was a kid, and me on this like bike that he used to bike around with me. And I collapsed on the floor. I was sobbing. I was crying. I was thanking God for for the experience, for the reconnection. And since then, I've made two more trips back to Kansas City with my kids. So the second trip was with me and my son. He's 7 now, so that he was able to meet his grandfather, and that was just absolutely incredible. I took him back to the same land, not with like 3 feet of snow on the ground this time of spring, but he was able to run and play in the same areas that I did when I was a kid. And then just recently, my wife and our daughters went with us the next time, and so he was able to meet all the grandkids all at once, and it was just nothing but love. My little brother came with us; they reconnected. It was just absolutely incredible. So that's the story. you know. Any questions or anything about any of that? I know that's it's a lot. It's a very, very, very big story.
Yeah, you got me tearing up over here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In the best way though. Oh my goodness. So your dad, it sounds like, welcomed you back with open arms,
With open arms, yeah. Yeah.
made it easy for you to
Yeah,
reconnect.
he'd been, I think, praying for this for a long time. And he was stuck in the most lose-lose of all lose-lose situations. If he pushed too hard, he was going to lose me. And if he didn't push at all, he was going to lose me. And so, what my dad did very, very, very wisely, and the only way I can really, the only way I can characterize it is, it was almost like he left clues for me to find, knowing that one day I was going to find them.
Yeah.
It was almost like he did that. It was almost like they were like little, like a trail of crumbs that I was supposed to follow. Where eventually, after following that, I would find like the answer, and that was eventually what happened. I think that the pictures in the cabin were a part of that. I think he very intentionally put those there, knowing that someday I was going to see them.
Mm.
That's the only explanation I have for like the actual pictures that he chose and where they were arranged and where they were and all those things. And the fact that nobody had really been inside this cabin in over 20 years, and they were still there. I mean, they had withstood the test of time and all of the wear and tear of the weather. They were still there, which was just amazing. So,
What a powerful, powerful story. What a
yeah,
dad. Sounds like
yeah,
a great, very resilient person. Um,
yeah. He's tough, and I think that he's a very, very, very smart guy. He's very, very, very well educated, and when I did eventually reconnect with him, what was interesting is I started really looking at his bookshelf because my dad's a big reader. And there were all these books on psychology and on divorce dynamics and even some books on different personality disorders and things like that. So clearly my dad was like reading about this stuff, trying to make heads or tails out of the craziness that was happening around him. But I think that what I saw upon reconnecting with him is he had trauma of his own from the experience, and by reconnecting with each other, we were the healing that we both needed. He helped me heal in the best way possible, and I helped him heal in the best way possible, which has just been, I mean, it's just been incredible.
yeah.
I wish it would have happened a lot sooner. And one of the struggles that I still have is that feeling of like I was robbed, like there were all these major life events that my dad really should have been a part of that he was not able to be a part of because we were alienated from each other. That's what alienation does. It robs kids of a really, really, really important part of their life that they're not going to get back. Um, Now, at the same time, it's hard to really speak into the mind of an alienator as though they're a sane person because they're not. You can't, you can't speak of an alienator as though they have the ability to entertain rational thought because they don't. So I can say all day, why can't an alienator just wake up and see the consequences of what they're doing? But that's the whole problem in the first place.
Mhm.
They don't understand the consequences of what they're doing. They're not capable of that kind of empathy. They're not capable of that kind of rational thought because they're not in their right mind, frankly. So I don't know.
So can we go back for a minute, if you don't mind, to
Yeah, please.
that exercise your rabbi had you do, and
Yeah.
back when you
Yep.
were seeing that 12-year-old version of yourself, and I
Yeah.
remember you said, did you say, I miss my dad? I
I
need
miss
my
my
dad?
dad. Yeah. That's what
I
he
miss,
said to me. Yeah.
I miss
Yeah,
my
and
dad.
come to find out, it's if you've ever heard the expression inner child healing,
Mhm.
that's what we were doing. And it's a very, very, very powerful form of therapy. I actually think for anybody going through an alienation dynamic like that, find a therapist who knows how to do this because it's very, very, very powerful. And for me later on, it was actually a technique that I could continue to use. Once I had kind of tapped into that, then I was able to say, okay, what were you feeling when you were 15? What might you have repressed then? What was that kid not allowed to say at that point? And
Mhm.
that was when a lot of the feelings about my mom started to come out, where there was a lot of anger there, and that I wasn't allowed to express. In my home, my mom had to be the hero. She had to be the caretaker. She was a narcissist, and so a lot of that had to come out, and still to this day, I still use that technique. You know, I check in on the kid every once in a while just to make sure that he's okay. There's a With alienation dynamics, there's something called fragmentation that happens. And I think it's not the same thing as like full blown dissociative identity disorder, although that can happen.
Hmm.
But what happens is that when a child's brain comes up against something that they can't make sense of,
Hmm.
there's a splintering off of the self. So part of the self is repressed. That part of the self that loves dad and knows that dad is amazing and wonderful and all of these things for the child's own safety, that part of the self is repressed. And then there's this other part that kind of comes out that for their own survival, they're aligned to the alienating parent. And so then now there's a conflict. There's a part of you that really wants dad, that wants to be close to him, but then there's another part that says, no, you can't do that. And
Hmm.
so that fragmentation happens. And in therapy, what makes the inner child exercise really, really powerful is that's what allows, both sides to kind of say what they need to say, and then you can kind of come together, right? And then you can have that wholeness that you're seeking, that oneness that you're seeking. Does that make sense?
Yes. I guess I'm wondering how you got from the powerful feeling of knowing that you missed your dad to the realization that you had been manipulated and
Oh,
abused.
that's a good question. So basically, what happened is that I did not, when all of those memories came flying back, I did not yet know the term parental alienation. I didn't know what that was.
Hmm.
All I knew was that I had been lied to about a lot of things, and it had radically altered my relationship with my dad. So you have to remember, all of this came out after like one therapy session with this rabbi. So I go in for like number two, and I say to my wife before I go in, I say, if I walk in there and he like takes off the mask and says, "Hi, by the way, I'm Jesus Christ," I'm gonna go, "Okay, finally, like I've met you." Okay, like it was really on that level. And so I go in there and I said, he's like, "So how you doing?" And I said, "I need you to tell me something. I need you to tell me how you knew what you knew." And he kind of smiled and he said, "Why do you need to know that?" And I said, "Well, because I care about the truth. That's what I care about." And he said, "Ah, so you're a truth seeker, are you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a truth seeker." And he said, "Okay, let's talk about that." And I said, "Okay, well, this is the truth that's come out. Let me tell you all about this." And so I started describing this
Hmm.
childhood to him, and he started crying in front of me. Like he just was like, I mean, he it was like the color went out of his face, and he finally he came over and he sat down next to me and he kind of put his arm around me and he said, "Kevin, that's not okay. That's child abuse, what happened to you." And I said, "It is?" And he said, "Yeah, that's child abuse." And he said, "By the way, and it also has a name. That's called parental alienation." And the reason I know that is because a friend of mine that I worked very closely with was involved in a custody dispute in which there were dynamics like the one that you described. And the judge listened to 5 hours of testimony from this therapist that I know and another therapist. And based on their testimonies, the woman that was doing the alienating lost custody of her kids for that. And I said, "Wow." And he said, "Yeah, so we've got some work to do here." And so that was when I first learned the term parental alienation. And so that was when kind of my own research on the topic began. I discovered your channel, which was really,
Oh,
really
really?
helpful. There were a couple videos from Dr. Childress that I listened to, the big long lectures. I listened to those. Those were really helpful. There were a few other, there was a Teal Swan video I remember that was like, when I listened to that one, I was like, wow, like that's exactly what happened to me. There was kind of that moment. And the struggle that I ran into, though, was I found a lot of resources out there for parents,
Right.
but I didn't find anything like if you're a kid who went through this,
Right.
you survived, and you've come to term and you're trying to come to terms with this. Like how do you get past this kind of trauma? And there just wasn't very much out there. I mean, maybe that's why people like you and me exist,
That's
so
why
that,
we exist,
that
Kevin.
maybe that's what we're doing. I don't know. So eventually, I think I do want to find a way to tell the story in a way that's healing, maybe a podcast or a book or something like that. But I'm not there yet. I'm still working on my own healing through all of this, and so I want to make sure that I'm in a good place before I tackle something like that. But it's definitely a desire that's there. So But that was how I first learned the term. And what was interesting about it is that I had mentioned the family therapy sessions that were ordered by the court when I was a teenager. So I remember thinking, well, I wonder if this therapist that was involved back then still practices. And I called him up. I actually found him and called him up. And I said, I don't know if you remember me at all, but this was what happened. And he said, unfortunately, I don't remember you. But the reason I don't remember you is because I had literally 1,000 cases just like that one. And the term, and I had used the term brainwashing, and he said, no, it's not brainwashing. That's a loaded term in the court. It's parental alienation. So he used it after my therapist had used it, and so there was some validation there too, where he was seeing the same kind of dynamic even back then. So
Wow. Did you
yeah.
have any did you have any anger towards your mom or towards a therapist or
Oh,
towards
geez,
anyone who
yeah.
enabled this?
Yeah. There were times when, when all this first came out, there were days when I would just go and like lock myself in my car and just scream. I mean, there were times that I screamed myself hoarse, at my mom. And when you're recovering from something like this, you got to allow yourself to feel whatever it is that you're going to feel. Um, I would have these moments of where I would just cry, and it wasn't like regular crying though. It was like my face would grimace almost like I wasn't in control of it. I remember at one point it was so intense that I bit down and cracked a tooth in the back because I bit down so hard. That was really early on. And what they don't tell you is when you have trauma stored up in the body, it has to leave once it starts to be released. But in my case, that was not so pleasant. I mean, there were nights where I was throwing up from it.
Mhm.
I had to go to the hospital at one point because there was like a vein in the back of my leg that had blown up. I told the doctor what I was going through, and he said, "Yeah, that's probably what caused that. It's nothing to be too concerned about, but that's what that is." And so, your body has to release that somehow. And yeah, definitely feelings of anger towards my mom, no doubt. And those are still there, if I'm being honest. But I think now it's tempered with the understanding that she was not an evil person. I do have good memories of her that I can hold on to, and I can treasure those. And there were times when she acted like a mom towards me. I did have good experiences with her. I really wish that she would have gotten the help that she needed. She was a severely, severely damaged person.
Mhm.
And at the end of her life, she died alone and miserable.
Mhm.
And I can empathize for somebody like that. I can. What's interesting about it is that the alienation actually backfired. And at the end of her life, she was estranged from me. I wasn't speaking to her. So she tried to kind of keep me all to herself. And in the end, that actually backfired and ended up kind of blowing up in her face. And so now when I look back on her, I do feel very, very, very sorry for her. I pity her. I wish that she would have gotten the help that she needed. She grew up in a day and age when we just didn't know as much about mental health as we do now.
Mhm.
So she had her own trauma that she dealt with her whole life. And really, the only thing that separated me from her, I mean, I was living in a delusion too. I was lying. I didn't know it, but I was lying too. I stood up in front of a court and told the entire courtroom that my dad was a monster. Uh, the key there is becoming aware, knowing what you're doing, understanding your actions and the consequences of your actions. And my mom just never got to that point. So
Did having kids at all change your perspective on your parents or your upbringing or open your eyes at all to this experience?
a little bit.
No.
I think that more than anything else, what having kids did was I knew from very early on that I wanted their experience to be different than mine. I knew that much. Now, I did not have everything in its right place. I did not understand that um, the person that had actually been the abuser in my life, it was sort of backwards in my brain. I was still thinking of my dad as an abuser and my mom as basically good in very, very, very like black and white ways. But I did know that I wanted my kids to have a different experience than what I had grown up with. And I also knew that it was important to be honest with them. I understood that much. And what was interesting was when I had reconnected with my dad, there were some things that I had told my son about him that were not necessarily true. Now,
Mm.
I had not said everything that my mom had said, but I had some things like, well, dad hurt daddy when he was little, and that's why we don't talk to him. And eventually it was interesting with him. I had to be really, really, really careful about it. But I kind of took him aside and I said, you know how how sometimes people can be mistaken about something. You know what that means? They're confused. Have you ever been confused about something? He's like, oh yeah, Daddy. And I said, well, let me tell you about my dad. And he's like, well, I thought your dad hurt you. And I said, well, that's not really the full story. Would you like to know the full story? And he's like, oh yeah, I like hearing stories about you, Daddy. And I said, okay, let me tell you a story. And that was how we started approaching it. And it actually didn't take very long for him to kind of get it. He's like, oh, okay, all right, well, I want to talk to my grandpa now. And I said, all right, I'll put him on the phone with you. And it was like, no time flat. He was like just the most natural thing in the world. It's like, okay, I haven't met him in 7 years, but so what? I'm okay with it. I've got him now. And so that was, but I also understand, I think now, having worked through the trauma, any trauma that we haven't worked through, we're going to somehow manifest that through our kids, and that's not okay.
Mhm.
We need to be the adults in the room, and very, very, very bad things happen to children when adults act like children and children are forced to act like adults. Very, very, very bad things happen when that's the dynamic. And so I don't want my kids to have that experience. So now doing the work of going to therapy and coming to terms with this really, really, really difficult stuff. It's really, I mean, it's for them. I don't
Yeah.
want them to have to relive this experience. And I would even say now, having, been in therapy now for 7 months working through all this, I'm a better dad. I'm definitely more patient than I used to be. I understand the way that children think a lot better. Even my wife has been able to kind of process some stuff from her childhood. So now she's kind of seen the effect that it's had on me. And so now she's kind of said, okay, I've got some stuff that I need to work through too. That's helped us with our marriage. I mean, and it helps us be better parents, all of those things. And so I think it's almost like the healing is contagious, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
It just kind of flows out, and it's a really beautiful thing. So
That's amazing. I
yeah,
have two more questions for you,
yeah,
and then
please,
we can open it up to a few questions from the
sure,
live chat if you're okay with that.
yeah.
Um, in the reconnecting with your dad, so far, what has been something that has surprised you, if anything? What's been the most surprising element?
He was exactly the way that I remember him. So there was nothing about his character that was surprising to me. But I guess what was a little interesting was just how much he actually knew. I was telling him all this as though it was this big major revelation. And his response was like, oh, Kevin, I've known all that shit for years. Like, it's like, you know, so that's kind of that's the sort of I guess if you want to call it surprising, but also just the amount of like patience that this man had,
Mm,
actually understanding the full story and seeing what he went through. This would be enough to drive anyone out of their mind,
mm,
and yet somehow he was able to keep it together. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that after he and my mom divorced, he found love again. He was with Connie, his wife, for almost 30 years after that, and then she had actually died about a year before my dad and I reconnected. So the reconnection happened at a really, really good time because he was about as low as he'd ever been. I mean, he had lost this really incredible, amazing person, and reconnecting with me, I think, kind of gave him a spark that he needed. But um, he had those things in his life that were able to kind of keep him going, and I'm really, really grateful for that. But just the resilience of this man. I mean, just the absolute resilience of him, and the depth of character that he actually has was really, really, really incredible to me. And seeing the way that he bonded to my kids, kind of immediately, he bonded to them, and that kind of reminded me of, okay, I was that age once.
yeah,
I was
yeah,
that kid climbing up into his lap. That was me actually back then. That kind of
yeah.
thing. So,
Yeah, those are beautiful moments. I love those moments.
mhm.
Did he ever try to tell you what was going on or hint at what was going on?
Yes, he did. But the way he would do it, he would suggest things without like going kind of over the top with it. So when I was younger, you can't say to a 6-year-old kid, your mother has Munchausen's by proxy and she's giving you medicine that you don't need.
Hmm.
You know, you can't say that. But what you can say is, hey, Kevin, your mom says you have asthma. Do you think that's true? I'd say, well,
Mm.
yeah, my mom says I have asthma. It must be true. Well, that's not really what asthma is. I've done some reading on this. Would you like to know what I've found out about this? Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Well, you can have a cold and it's like that. You don't need all these treatments, that kind of thing. So he would suggest things like that without coming all the way over the top and saying, your mom's crazy. He would suggest those things because again, I mean, even to this day, when I reconnected with him, one of the first things he said to me was, I loved your mother dearly, and she was not a bad person.
Yeah.
Even like, yeah, he was just the forgiving spirit of this man was just incredible. Like she abandoned him. She took basically everything he had, and yet still his heart was love and forgiveness. And so that's why I say for me, it was probably the most spiritual experience I've ever had. Seeing the face of God through my dad and that kind of love. That's who God is to me. It's that kind of, forgiving, loving father who loves us unconditionally. And so for me, it's strengthened my own sense of faith. It's made me better at what I do. Yeah,
That's just beautiful.
yeah,
Um, and then I'll just end on the question I like to ask everybody that I interview.
please.
So, and feel free to take a few moments to think about this, but if you could pick the most important thing that you would like people to know about this psychological child abuse, what would it be?
It's got to stop.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's funny in my own research into the subject. It's interesting that parental alienation is kind of a loaded term, but that's why I think I appreciate some of what Dr. Childress has put out about it because the fact that it's happening has never been the thing that's controversial. Like, yes, it happens. The controversial thing is, what do you call it, and whether you call it what's the term, a syndrome or not. That's what's controversial. The fact that it's happening is not controversial. Of course, it happens,
Hmm.
and we have the terms that we need to describe the dynamic. Um, I think that awareness is key, which is where your voice and the voices like you are very, very, very important. Thank you for what you do, by the way. It's important. It makes a difference. But I think just the awareness of understanding that kids don't reject their parents. That's not a natural thing that children do. And so if you see that, you need to immediately start asking questions. To me, that's I think the important thing. It's got to stop. And it's got to stop because, frankly, I was one of the lucky ones. How many kids don't have the chance to connect with their dad? How many kids are another Kevin Scott and their parents are dead by the time they figure all this out? And then they have to deal with a lifetime of remorse and guilt that they should not have to carry because it's not their fault. You know, it's just got to stop.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's got to stop. Um, I think that the legal system needs to be a lot wiser about this. I think there needs to be more education among family therapists about this kind of thing. Um, look, the dynamic happens. I can only draw on my own experience. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but it was
Mhm.
enough to give me full blown amnesia and PTSD. And I was one of the lucky ones. For a lot of kids, the consequences can be a lot worse. And I think that if my dad had not kept trying to re-engage with me, the consequences for me could have actually been a lot worse. I think the reason why I turned out comparatively normal
Me
compared to
too.
some people that go through this is because he never stopped trying to get me, So does that make sense?
Again, this is all making complete sense to me.
Yeah,
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. And I think part of this is to change things for our own kids and leave a
yeah,
better legacy for our own kids.
yeah. The most important thing is look, tell the truth. Don't
Mhm.
ever lie. Lies are the most damaging thing in the whole universe, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
And we need to be truthful. We need to be truthful with ourselves. We need to be truthful with the people around us, and we need to be truthful with our kids. Um, in these high conflict divorce type situations, there needs to be honesty. There needs to be integrity, and there needs to be, I think, even education for parents that are going through that with each other. You need to encourage a positive relationship with the other parent, even if that's difficult. And if you don't, you could screw this kid up for life. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Well, I just can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story. I have been glancing at the live chat throughout this conversation, and so many people have just expressed their gratitude, and you're a gift for
No, no,
sharing.
no. That's I'm humbled.
Yeah. I mean, not many people are brave enough to even speak out about it if they are able to learn the truth to begin with. Are there any last thoughts that you have before we open it up to questions that other people have on your story or your message, anything at all? And how can people support you in your healing journey?
Yeah, so it can be a really isolating experience if you're going through it. Don't try to do it alone. If you're a parent, if you're an adult survivor of this, find yourself a really good therapist that can help you work through the very, very, very complex emotions that come with this, because you cannot do it alone, and you can't do it without a really, really, really good support network around you. If you can find a support group, that's great. I've got a really, really good one that I attend kind of sporadically, where there's adult survivors in there too. There's not very many of us. There's four or five, but that's been really good. That's been really healing. And don't isolate yourself. The alienation alone is a very isolating experience. And the remedy for that is to find a safe place where you can share, where you can open up, and where you can bring all this stuff to the surface and discuss it. And if there's mutual healing that happens from that through shared storytelling, then that's amazing. That's a gift, So, yeah, I mean that's the best advice I can give. My prayers are with anybody going through this. It's not easy. It's actually, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, but if you're going through it, uh, just know I remember, I can't remember what video it was that I was watching, but the person said, remember that you've got a couple of very, very, very powerful allies on your side: truth, love, and healing. And those are very, very, very powerful. And in my case, that's definitely been true. The truth will have its day. It might take it a while, but the truth eventually has its day. You can't suppress that forever. So,
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I
yeah,
think that is really important to remember. So for anyone who's here in the live chat, go ahead and leave your questions if you have any. I have two to start with that I've seen.
yep,
Somebody asks, Kevin, how old were you when you testified that your dad was abusive and you, oh, that was the first
yep.
question I
Yeah,
had.
so I was, let me think back to that, 15. So my mom had taken me away from my dad when I was 12, and then had kept me from him so I was between 14 and 15, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yep.
It's a really difficult time in anyone's life, 15 years old.
Oh, geez.
Um, but to have to
Yes.
do that.
Yep.
And did you realize the lies in the moment or only in retrospect? I think
Only in
you're referring to
retrospect.
that.
Only in retrospect. Because what you have to understand is that when I was 12, that was when I had seen my dad it hit my brother. And again, I still don't believe that he was abusive in any way. He should not have done that, but it was an emotional reaction to a very emotional situation. Um, but once that happened, I was taken away from my dad, and my mom kept me from him for about 2 years, where there was no court involvement whatsoever, and she was just kind of able to pump into me whatever she wanted at that point. And so that was when really the recreation of the story, if you will, would continue, and eventually the story grew and grew and grew and grew and grew until by the time I got in front of a court, I was telling him that my dad was a drunk, and was all these other things that he was not at all. And in my mind, that was my reality at that point. There's something that happens, and I think that there's a few different channels that talk about this. But when a kid is in an alienation dynamic, they're in a fused state with the alienating parent,
Yeah.
where their self is actually repressed. So all of the thoughts and feelings and emotions that the alienating parent is feeling, that's all being filtered through the kid. And that's what I experienced. So in the moment, did I understand that those were lies? No, 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 no. That was my reality at that point. Now, at the same time, though, I felt really guilty. I felt shame. I felt sad. I still, all the feelings were still there. I just didn't know why they were there. And they were there because I wanted my dad, and I knew that he wasn't any of these things. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Um, from watching Dr. Childress, I think that that might be the persecutory delusion imposed on the child.
yep, yep, yep. That's exactly right.
Oh, it's so funny that somebody just said that. Somebody literally just
Story
typed that.
delusion. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would actually be a really, really, really good name for like a death metal band. Persecutory delusion.
Yeah. And that's what it feels like too, right? Like a
Yeah,
death
yeah, it
metal
does. Oh yeah,
concert.
yeah, coming all down on you. Yeah,
Oh
absolutely.
my gosh. I'm glad we laughed throughout the interview as well.
Yeah, if you don't,
Um,
if you can't, well, you either cry or you laugh about it. That's kind of your choice. Or sometimes you do both at the
yes,
same
I feel
time.
that in my soul.
Yeah,
It's definitely made me a funnier person. So, we have a few more questions. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. I love that people are engaging. And go ahead and like the video if you can. If that would really help us get it in the algorithm and
like and
inform more
share.
people about how destructive this really is. Um, so, Kevin, this is a good question. I didn't ask this question. Did you get alienated from your grandparents and that side of the family too?
Yes. So it was actually, and not just my grandparents, but that whole side of the family. So eventually, everything that my mother was telling me about my father became enlarged to include that entire side of the family. So not only was my father a
Mm,
child molesting, wife beating drunk, but actually all the Scots are that way. They're all that way. Which again, come to find out, none of that is true at all. No, the Scots are a very eccentric, eclectic bunch of people that I love very, very much. And unfortunately, I never met my grandfather on that side. He was unfortunately kind of kept away from me through all this. But it was interesting that when I was reconnecting with my dad, my grandfather was a very, very talented poet. He wrote absolutely gorgeous poetry. And in going through my dad's stuff, I found some of my grandfather's old poetry and I kept it. So I kind of have a kindred spirit there now. And so now, whenever I'm writing about this stuff, I almost feel like that's, kind of my grandfather, channeled through me, if you will. That sounds weird, but
no, I just
yeah,
got goosebumps. That's
right.
beautiful.
Yeah, so that's my connection to him. Really, really, really gorgeous stuff. And so the healing and the love was contagious. Reconnecting with my dad also meant reconnecting with all these amazing, amazing, amazing people that I had been just distanced from for so long. And they were just like my dad. They took me back with open arms and were so happy to see that I had discovered this and hearing about a lot of things that I sort of remembered from childhood from their perspective
Hmm.
was very, very, very telling as well. It was very affirming for a lot of the things that I was kind of remembering. So,
Yeah, that's important. I also did the same thing. Talk to other family members.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah,
Um, someone asks, did she ever try to replace him with a boyfriend or
yes.
stepfather?
Stepfather, yeah. So that's a very, very, very complex subject. So she remarried when I was 6,
Okay.
and my stepfather and I have a very complicated relationship because on his own merits, he's not a bad guy, but my mom married him very intentionally trying to replace my dad. Very, very, very intentionally trying to do that.
Hmm.
And my stepfather kind of fell into that role. And I resented that. And so that created friction between he and I growing up. And I didn't even know where the friction was coming from. I just knew that I didn't like him. And it was because for me that term dad was always going to be a really sacred one. And I was not going to apply it to just anybody. And I refused to apply it to him. I wouldn't do it. Even to this day, I don't call him. I call him Mark when we talk, and it's not because I don't hate him, but it's just that he was brought into our lives for a very intentional reason that I'm not even sure he was fully aware of. I'm not even sure he understood what he was really biting into. I think he went into that marriage with the best of intentions. I think that he does legitimately love me. I do think that. And he had ways of showing that through the years, but he also was not really equipped to be a stepdad in the way that a stepdad should be a stepdad, if that makes sense.
It
So
does. It
yeah,
does. Maybe that was you refusing to call him dad. Maybe that was part of you,
that's exactly yeah. Yep,
yeah.
that's exactly it. Yeah, it was because it was sacred to me. Even when I was completely backwards in my thinking about my dad, I was, that was still a sacred word for me. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Somebody asks whether you have found uh sorry, I missed that question. Someone says, you mentioned your father communicating just enough. What types of things did your father say or write to you when you were strongly under the influence?
yeah, so he would write me letters, and he would try a number of different tactics. He would call me. His tactic with the telephone, by the way, was just to call me and call me and call me and call me until I would finally pick up, and then he would sort of chew me out a little bit, and then we would talk. But the letters were interesting though because I went back and reread a bunch of them that I just had lying around, and understanding now what I understand, the phraseology in them became a lot more important. And
Mhm,
I could see that he really was trying to lead me in the right direction without beating me over the head with it.
mhm,
So at one point, I remember there's a letter that I actually have in the other room that I saved, and he had written it, and in there at one point he said something like, the next time you go to a health screening, just ask the doctor about asthma and ask if that's something that he thinks that you've struggled with. So like those kinds of suggestions. If he could kind of poke a hole in one piece of dishonesty, then I think his hope was that eventually I was going to put the pieces together and come back to, okay, so if she lied to me about this, what else did she lie to me about? And eventually that's what happened. That is actually eventually what happened. That was kind of the way that it went. When all of it kind of came to the surface, there was this process of just deconstructing every single thing my mother had ever told me, not just about my dad, but about herself, about my family, about all kinds of things that I had to put under a microscope. And I had to ask, does this actually make sense? And what came out was there were some things that were true, there were some things that were half true, and there were some things that were flat out not true. So does that make sense?
it really does. Because you wonder, there could be some exaggerated truth, some bits of truth,
Exactly.
and
Yep.
then some flat out lies. It's hard
Correct.
to differentiate um what is real and what is not to some degree.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end if you feel good about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. No, no, no. I do feel good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. And again, to anybody out there going through this, my heart's with you. Keep fighting. I know it's a struggle. I know that at times there are no easy answers to this, but if you're a parent, love your kids. That's the best advice I can give you. Find a way to love your kids and find a way to make sure that they know that.
Excellent. And is there any way that people can support you?
Um, that's actually a really good question.
Your healing or any type of
I think so.
work?
My belief is that healing is contagious. So I think that if people find their own healing, somehow that impacts me and my healing. So go find some healing, and that's the best way that you can support me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for
You're
sharing
very
your
welcome.
story. It's been very powerful, and I feel very grateful to have had you on tonight and
I'm
talked to you.
humbled.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we'll talk to you next time. Without further ado, let's welcome Kevin to the Anti-Alienation Project.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Hey, Kevin, and welcome back to the Anti-Alienation Project.
It's great to be here tonight. Thank you for having me on again. I have to apologize to our guests. I am in the room in my home with possibly the worst lighting, but it's because at the moment I'm hiding from my three children. I love them very, very much, but they are ages 7, 4, and 2. And they like to invade spaces, interrupt things, and break computers. And so I've locked myself in their room, ironically, to keep that from happening this evening so we can be uninterrupted for this important conversation.
I love it. And shout out to my husband who has our 3 kids right now. outside playing so that I could have this conversation.
Oh
So
yeah. Shout out to the wife too. I love you, honey. Thank you for doing the solo parent journey. The struggle is real.
we have awesome partners.
Yes.
So, Kevin, let's just get into it. In your
Yeah.
first interview, which I would encourage everyone to watch after this, it's so powerful and moving. You shared basically your life story,
Yep.
and tonight is part two, the aftermath of learning that you were lied to for most of your life about your relationship with your dad. And we're talking about what healing looks like. But before we get into that, could you give a very brief summary of your experience, just for people who are not familiar with your
Yeah.
base?
So again, I think that if you go back and watch part one of the interview, that tells the whole story. But the short version is I was alienated from my dad on and off from age 3 to about age 41 when I figured it out. And there were different stages in that alienation. There were times that we were close, that we were together, and then there were times that we were pulled apart. There were court systems involved, some really, really, really messed up things there. And the bottom line is that it took a very, very, very talented therapist and some really, really good inner child healing for me to kind of connect the dots and put all this together. And it really was just an incredible journey of healing. And I was able to reconnect with my dad about going on about a year ago. I've been in therapy for just about a year, and this all came out pretty quickly in the beginning. And now my dad and I we are reunited. He's met his grandkids. He's met my family. We've made a few trips back home where he lives. And that's all been really, really incredible. But after kind of part one of the story, I think that the part that was sort of missing from that, we dove into it a little bit. But when I first started to get into this space and started to learn more about this dynamic and this phenomenon that we call parental alienation, I saw that there were a lot of things out there. There were resources for parents, but I was asking those questions. Well, what about the kids that went through it and now as adults have all of this trauma and all of this nastiness left over from that? You know, what's out there for us? And there just wasn't very much. And so I'm a very systematic thinker. And so I started trying to put something together. What were really the stages that I went through? What do I think for somebody going through this, or somebody who's found out or suspects even that they went through something like this? What are the steps that they need to take to find their own healing? What are sort of the essential stages that you go through, if you want to look at it that way? So I think we're going to get into a little bit of that tonight. Does that answer the question fully? Again, go watch part one. It's a really long story.
Part one brought me to tears. It was just such a powerful story. I would really encourage people to watch it after this. And so you came to me and shared an outline of the 12 steps that you have basically narrowed it down to, that have been part of your healing journey. And I read the 12 steps and I was like, okay, this is like almost exactly what I did. So I think you're onto something. And I'm really excited to use those 12 steps as a general outline for this conversation. So before we get into those 12 steps, I first wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
So what does recovery mean to you now compared to when you first began this journey?
It is a lifelong journey. I've heard the saying before, when people say healing it's not linear, it's circular. And I think that's true. It's not something where you're ever going to fully arrive at the destination where you really want to be. And you kind of have to accept that. I remember it was a couple of months ago. I went in to see my rabbi, and I had been I felt like I was on a roll. I hadn't been triggered in weeks, if not months. And I was saying to him, I really do think I've got this handled. I don't think I'm going to be triggered ever again. And he said, don't say that.
Yeah.
He said, you will be triggered again, I guarantee you. And I said, yeah. I was, okay, yeah, right. And then the very next week, there was something related to the church that I work in where I had to go into a courtroom. And I've never really been to court. I've never really had to do that. And the minute that I set foot in this courtroom, I felt like I was going to throw up. And it was like, and I got triggered worse than I ever had in my life. Now, thank God, I mean, I knew pretty much right away what was going on. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a trigger. I know how to deal with this. And so I was able to deal with it in a really good way. But it was, the next time I went and saw him, I said, hey, you're never going to believe what happened. And he said, you got triggered, didn't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, don't be ashamed of that. This is a lifelong thing. And so I think that's really what I'm learning is that each day is, each day is a new day. And there are stages, you just get deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And, hopefully you're able to continue in a way where I think if there's a goal that I'm shooting for and I haven't arrived yet, but I think I'm getting there. I think that you really know that you're on the right path when you're able to take something so horrible and so terrible and so traumatizing, and you're able to help other people who are going through the same thing. And that's why I've started to kind of enter this space, because I'm at that stage. I'm feeling whole enough and healed enough that I feel like I can contribute something positive for people who are going through something similar, whether they be parents or children or adult survivors, whatever it happens to be. So.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So your first step, number 1, is connect with a therapist, establish safety, and begin inner child work.
Yes. So that's a lot, but let me say this much. So I firmly believe that parental alienation type psychological abuse is one of, if not the most damaging forms of abuse that a kid can experience. There are so many pieces to it that make it unique. I think that one of the biggest things that separates parental alienation from other forms of abuse is the impact that it has on the memory. That's huge. The impact that it has on memory. I think that the element of confusion and the element of, I actually just listened to a really, really good presentation on parental alienation, and I really wish I could remember the psychologist's name, but she was drawing parallels between the behaviors that you see that cults use and the same kinds of behaviors that alienating parents use. And there are a lot of parallels. And as a matter of fact, the therapies are kind of similar. There are some parallels between those two kinds of therapies where you are almost in shock in the beginning because of just the amount of things that you believe that weren't true. And that's where a therapist is really, really important. I firmly believe that if you even suspect that you've gone through something like this, you are not going to be prepared for the amount of emotions that you're going to feel and the extremity of emotion that you're going to feel. You need a safe place to do that. You need that place where you can allow yourself to feel those things that as a small child you were not allowed to feel. Sometimes, for me, that was, there was a lot. There was extremity of anger. I needed to let myself feel that. I needed to go somewhere and just yell. Usually it was my car.
Me too.
The crying was unreal. I have, at one point, I'd been in therapy for about 4 weeks, and my wife actually called my therapist, my rabbi, and she said, I have never seen Kevin like this ever. We've been married 10 years. We've been together 12. I've never seen him like this. And the rabbi's response was, this is the grief that he needs to process. We need to let him do this. And that was true. And you need a good therapist to guide you through that. It's not something that you feel every day. It's not an everyday set of emotions. It's very uniquely tied to this dynamic. And so now for what makes for a good therapist, I think that's highly subjective depending on the person. For me, my rabbi is great because we have a similar spiritual foundation that we're able to draw off of, even though our traditions are different. And that's helpful. So for me, he's kind of the ideal guy. I do think that you really need to find somebody who knows how to engage with the inner child and is comfortable engaging with the unconscious, because a lot of what happens in these alienation dynamics involves the memory, and you have to be able to tap into that. Those memories are still there, but they're deeply, 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 deeply repressed. And so I think a really good therapist sort of knows their way around this. So
I agree with you. Let's talk about that for a second. So
Yeah.
the inner child work that you've done, can you talk about that and how it's changed your relationship with yourself? I've also done a lot of that now, and I found it to be the most helpful part of therapy, that type of healing that I've done.
Yep.
So yeah, I would love to talk about that.
Yeah, it's a very almost, I would even call it almost a mystical experience, because what you're doing is you are going to that part of yourself that I call it the soul, but it's the deepest part of yourself where all of these different stages of you still exist. There's an infant you, there's a 2-year-old you, there's a 3-year-old you, a 5-year-old you, a 6-year-old you. And your key to tapping into that space is memory, memory and feeling. And if you can tie a feeling to a specific memory and then try to trace it back as early as you can, then you can tap into that that stage or that child. So for me, my example, when I went to see my rabbi, the first thing that I said to him was, he asked me what I was struggling with. And I said, I feel like I'm running to get nowhere. I feel like I'm stuck. And he asked me, when was the first time that you felt that? Let's try to find that. And I was able to trace it back to when I was about 12. And then he laid me down and he had me have a conversation with my 12-year-old self. And that was what eventually brought all of this out into the open, was that conversation with me. So when you're doing inner child work, that's kind of what you're doing. You're going to yourself at different stages of development and just checking in and tapping into the feelings, experiences, emotions, even words that you were experiencing at that time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. For me, I think it's given me more empathy for myself at different ages, and realizing, because it's easy to look back and be angry at yourself for like, I wish I had done this differently. I wish I had done this. I wish I had acted better. I wish I had made these different decisions. And then if I actually put myself back at 12 years old, 15 years old, 18, 25, I realize, and really put myself back there, I realize, heck, I was doing the best I could. I was trying to survive. And I don't know if you've had any type of experience like that, but it's definitely given me more empathy.
Definitely. And I think that what set me on the right path was when I reconnected with my dad. The first conversation that we had, the very first conversation over the phone, I was crying and I was all apologies. It was like, Dad, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Because I had said horrible things to him and I had been very cruel to him. And his response to me, it was amazing. He said, Kevin, you let that stuff go. This was something that was done to you. You didn't do this to us. We did this. He actually used the term we, which was really interesting. It was almost like he was taking some of the responsibility, even though he didn't, in the context of things, really do anything wrong. He was saying, we did this to you. It wasn't your job when you were 5 years old to know the complexities of right and wrong in this situation. It was our job to protect you, and we failed. That was kind of what he was saying to me. And so knowing that the man who had probably been hurt the worst through this whole experience was not holding this against me, that helped me kind of let myself off the hook a little bit. It was like, okay, my dad's not judging me. I shouldn't judge myself either. This is a little bit more complex, but I remember at one point, it was actually right around the time of the courtroom trigger thing that I alluded to, but I was using the expression, I was a different person back then. I was talking about the things that I had done with my dad when I was 17. I was a different person back then. I was a different person back then. And I realized in connecting with 17-year-old me that actually that was really, really, really hurtful to 17-year-old me to say that, because I was saying, that 17-year-old, that's not me. Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, that's you. Like, who the heck was it then? Was it Bob down the street? No, it was Kevin. That was you. That was traumatized you. That was alienated you. That was brainwashed you. But that was still you. And if you say, no, I'm a different person now, you're kind of you're distancing, and even you're cutting off a part of yourself. You're falling back into that same trap, and you don't want to do that. And so that was helpful in kind of embracing that and saying, okay, yeah, it's when I was 17, I said I did some horrible things, but there were reasons for that. There were reasons why that was happening that were not your fault, so.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I see in the live chat, I do see quite a few child survivors that I know. So we are speaking to other people. Yeah. Anyone out there who's been through this as a kid, we are with you in spirit. Amen. So point number 2 for you was the light bulb moment. So I know we talked about it in your other interview, your light bulb moment.
Yeah.
But was there a specific moment for you when it clicked, or when you realized that you were alienated as a child? And
yes.
How did that feel emotionally, mentally, spiritually?
So for me, I don't know if it's this way in every case, but I think that there is a common thread there. And for me, it was almost like all of these very weird things about my life, my relationship with my mom, the way that I grew up, things that I was feeling, things that I had experienced, it all kind of came together into one singular, if that makes sense. And it was, it felt like getting shot. It hurt a lot. As a matter of fact, when I went through that experience, it was really the first time that I had engaged with my inner child and had allowed the inner child to speak. And what the inner child said to me was, I miss my dad. And as soon as those words came out of the inner child, I got my memories back all at once. It was like all of these memories that I had lost got downloaded back into my brain all at once. And this sound just came out of me like a wounded animal. That's what it sounded like. It was like a howl. And I yelled out, honey, I need you. My wife came in, she grabbed me. I was shaking. I was bawling. I couldn't talk. And finally, after like 45 minutes of this, I said, honey, I'm going to share with you something that I've never told anybody. And she listened. She was great. And so for me, there was that singular moment of awareness where suddenly everything clicked, everything made sense. And what was interesting is at that point, I had never heard the term parental alienation. I didn't know what that was. All I knew was that my mom had lied to me about a lot of things, and that had radically altered the relationship that I had with my dad. And I had believed things about my dad and acted on them that deep down inside I knew weren't true, but I didn't know why I had done that. And so I had just sort of shoved all that down, and it all came back flying to the surface. And I think it was within the next couple of days to maybe a week, that was when I first learned the term parental alienation from my own therapist. And that was when I started to connect the cognitive pieces, the information, but all of the facts were already there. The facts were here. And I just needed to organize that in a way. And that can actually be really healing in and of itself, because the way that in therapy, what I've learned is that you have a feeling brain and you have a thinking brain, and there's all these different parts of the brain. And when you're triggered, when you're in a heightened emotional state, one of the ways that you can get out of that is to activate your thinking brain, to do something that forces you into that thinking mode. And for me, research is actually really helpful for that. Reading is really helpful for that. Writing down what I've learned and trying to kind of systematize it and process it through that way is really, really helpful. So for me, there was a singular moment. I don't know if it happens that way with everyone, but for me, it came very, very, very shortly after entering into therapy because frankly, my therapist is really good. He's really, really good at this. So he was able to get it out. But I'll also add though, that search for a therapist, I mean, 7 different therapists missed this with me, 7. And the one that I'm seeing currently figured it out after 1 session. So I think that, yeah, I believe in God. And so that's my explanation. You may not agree, but that's my explanation for it. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I have so many thoughts. Okay. So first of all, I've interviewed dozens of survivors now from the child's point of view. And so far, everybody has had a light bulb moment. Yeah. Just like that. And it's just like that. For me, it was like my life was a bunch of different puzzle pieces scattered throughout the sky, like everywhere. And then in that moment, it like the puzzle piece came together. Like it was clear as day. This is why my life has been like this. Like this makes so much sense.
Yes.
So
I'll also say this is something that I didn't share in our last session because it hadn't happened yet. But one of the things that I found very, very helpful was going back to people who were around back then and asking for their perspective on things. And what you almost do in the beginning, you almost gaslight yourself. It's the expression that I usually go, this cannot possibly be true. I'm crazy. That's the answer, and then you go back and you talk to people and they kind of affirm things. But for me, one of the most helpful people that I talked to was a guy by the name of, his name's Eric Miller. And he was a court-appointed supervisee for the visitations that I had with my dad when I was between the ages of, we'll say 5 and 7, about that age. And what was interesting about him is he was handpicked by my mom because he went to our church. We had small groups at this church, and we were in his small group with his wife. And so I'm sure that my mother picked him thinking that he would be a biased person in all of this. And she had already kind of poured into his head all of these things about my dad. And what was interesting about it is I went back and I actually found him. I had not spoken to him since I was 9 years old. That was the last time I saw him. And I found him and I called him up and I said, you may not remember me, but he was like, oh yeah. I remember all of this. And we had like a 3-hour conversation about the whole thing. And he said, your mom made your dad out to be a really, really, really bad guy. So in the beginning, it was really awkward for me because I had to sit there with him and I didn't know what to make of it. But pretty quickly, I started to question a lot of the things that she was saying because he seemed to just be a very loving, devoted father. And I just didn't really see a lot of the evidence for the things that she was saying. So finally, I spent almost a year with him and you guys in these supervised visitations. And finally, I went to the court and I said, I just don't see any evidence of this. And so that was helpful for me because if somebody as smart as him, he was an adult and he still kind of had the wool pulled over his eyes. If somebody like that could be duped and drawn into this whole thing, then, you can forgive the 4-year-old version of yourself for being confused and being drawn up into it too. So.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you that's a good point.
Yeah.
People don't understand how confusing it is when you first figure it out. I did the whole gaslighting myself thing too.
Yes.
Every day.
Yes.
I mean, I didn't know it was up from down.
Yep.
I didn't know what was real about my life. I didn't know who my mom was. I didn't know who my dad was. I didn't even know things about myself.
Yes.
I was that duped, that betrayed. And so I needed to find facts. And I've said it in my videos before. I was like a little detective trying to figure out my own life.
Exactly. Yep. So that's where, I probably should have added this as like a sub step, but when you start gaslighting yourself, find those firm things that you can hold on to. If you can find, for me, I went back and found like court records. Those were helpful. I went back and found school records that alluded to different things. That was helpful. I spoke with, oh my gosh, numerous people that were around back then to help me kind of fill in the blanks. And that was really, 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 really helpful. Even a couple of different court-appointed therapists, I called them up and just asked for their perspectives on things. And that for me helped fill in a lot of those blanks. So after you have that initial light bulb moment, then you have to kind of pick up the pieces of what's what here. And that's where turning on your thinking brain, be the little detective. I think that's actually part of the healing.
I think so too. And also paying attention to your body, I would add, because for example, when I confronted the parent who had alienated me from my dad, my body had a physical reaction.
Yep.
And when I started to spend time with my dad as well, it was important to listen to my body to know if I was safe rather
Yes.
than my thoughts that have been so programmed.
Yes.
But I have one more question before we move
Sure.
on from the light bulb moment. I'm so curious to ask you this.
Yeah.
Because of my own experience, just to hear your answer. But when you had that light bulb moment, did you feel relief or more confusion at first?
I think it was the most unique experience I've ever had. And it's very hard to quantify it in words. I felt like a different person. Pretty quickly, within days, I was feeling much more deliberate about the way I was speaking, the way I was thinking, the way I was moving. I didn't realize how anxious I had been until suddenly I wasn't anxious anymore. It was like I was at this place of just perfect objectivity. That's the best way to put it. And it was incredible relief. And initially I was like, oh my gosh, like if this is what discovery means, like bring it on. This is the best I've ever felt in my life. What I didn't know though was that when you open that Pandora's box, that child you has a lot of grieving to do, and that would come out later. And there were times when I was going through that where it was like, I wish I'd never opened this. I can't do this. This is awful.
Yeah.
And so I think that with that, for me, it was a little different too, because my mom was dead. My mom had died several years before I uncovered all of this. So I didn't have that moment of like confronting the parent that had alienated me. There were some things one thing that I did do was I went back and I spoke with like all of my aunts and uncles related to my mom. And I was almost afraid to do even that because of what they had been led to believe over the years. But they were all very, very supportive. Every single one of them. I got nothing but, they didn't know the full story, but they always kind of suspected that something like that was going on, but they didn't really have anything solid to go off of. And so they just kind of loved me is the best way to put it, and tried not to put me in the middle of things, so.
I'm so helpful. I'm so glad that they had a helpful response for you.
Yeah.
So talking about step number 3, you said for you was the reactivation of the grief response.
Yes.
I want to get into this and I want to talk about it until we don't need to talk about it anymore, because I think that this type of betrayal trauma and this type of grief is so poorly understood from what the child experiences, what the adult child experiences. So I want to talk about what grief looks like and feels like when it has been delayed for decades.
Yeah. So I will admit up front that I am shamelessly ripping off Dr. Craig Childress with what I'm about to say. So Dr. Childress, if you're out there, don't shoot me, please. But I'm shamelessly ripping him off when I say this, but he talks about a misattributed grief response. And that's where all of this starts in childhood. So the way that it starts is when there's a divorce, when there's a high conflict divorce, that activates a child's grief response because the family is breaking up. And that's understandably very, very, very sad. Now, what happens, though, in a parental alienation dynamic is the alienating parent takes that grief response and they misdirect it. So when they, for example, the targeted parent might say something like, yeah, your mom and I couldn't work this out. It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. And so they don't really give the kid a firm answer. Okay. but the alienating parent gives the kid an answer. It's the wrong answer, but they give them an answer. And the answer is, the reason you feel this way is because this other parent is such a bad parent and it's their fault. And so it misattributes the grief response. And so then what that does is it activates the grief response a second time. So it's even worse, because then the child is cutting a parent out of their life. And it's the same thing as a death, and so then the kid feels worse. And well, the reason you feel so bad is because your other parent is such a bad parent. They're such a bad parent. They're such a bad parent. And it's a misattributed grief response. And so the kid never gets any better, because they're not dealing with the root of the problem. They're confused about what the problem actually is. They go their whole lives thinking all of this grief and sadness and depression and anxiety and whatever else it happens to be is coming from the fact that this other parent is a bad parent. That's not what it is. It's not that at all. You're grieving because your family broke up, which is sad, and you're grieving a second time because your parent died. You cut them out of your life. It's the same thing as a death. That's incredibly sad. And so when you begin to heal, that grief response is oriented in the right place. And when that happens, the grief response is reactivated. So you have to grieve all of those things that you were not allowed to grieve as a child. That's the breakup of the family. That's the metaphorical death of the alienated parent. For me, it was even the alienating parent. There was the loss of a relationship that I thought I had, that I really didn't have. There was that loss. So it's a lot of grief coming out all at once. It is, for me personally, it was the most intense season of grief that I have ever been through. And I've lost people in my life that I love very, very much. And I've been through some very, very difficult things. Nothing held a candle to this. This was grief like I have never experienced in my life. And for that reason, again, you got to go back to the therapist, the safe place, somebody that knows how to do bereavement therapy, somebody that knows how to walk with you through those stages. That's so, so, so important. So that's a lot, and it's a little bit technical, but that was my experience. And when I heard Dr. Childress talk about the misattribution of the grief response, I said, yeah, that is exactly what I experienced.
Wow. I hadn't even heard that from Dr. Childress. You're informing me right now for the first time. And oh boy, that is like so on point for what you go through as a kid. You're not allowed to grieve that parent. So no. Yeah, that is so precise. Wow. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to help a lot of people make sense of their experience. So how did you create space in your life for the grief to unfold beyond going to therapy? Because I know that it's hard to, for me, it was so hard to compartmentalize that and only feel that grief in a therapy session.
There was a lot. And the first thing that I had to do was I had to embrace it as necessary. There's a difference between self-pity and grief. Those are not the same thing. And knowing about the stages of grief, that's a very real thing. That was really helpful for me too. It's not linear though. You might experience, some people say there's 5, some people say there's 7, but you may experience every single one of those in one day. You've got your, there's anger, there's bargaining, there's denial, there's depression. Finally, you get to acceptance, but you may experience all of that in one day. You may go through it several different times. And for me, there were so many different layers to it that to even try to quantify it in a short interview is going to be really hard. But I can say a few things. Okay. So one thing that was really interesting, this is an interesting story, but if you remember the film The Land Before Time, if you remember that film from the 80s, it came out in 1988. I used to watch that movie over and over and over and over again when I was a little kid. And I related so much to the character of Littlefoot. And I didn't know why. I had no idea. But I remember as a kid, I used to watch that movie when I was really, really little, and I used to get really, really, really sad. I would cry when I would watch it. And I remember my mom saying, we're not going to let you watch this. It's too sad. But I always wanted to watch it. It's like, well, why do you want to watch it if it's so sad for you? And now as an adult, there was one night where my kids wanted to watch it, and so I put it on for them. And sure enough, in the scene where Littlefoot loses his mom, I was bawling my eyes out. I was sobbing. And it was like suddenly the pieces kind of connected. And it was like, oh, no, 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 no. You saw yourself in that story because that kind of is your story. You lost a parent in this incredibly tragic way. You were separated from them. You were cut off from them. And you found support in friends and family. And you were always trying to make it back to this safe place of family. In the story, it's the Great Valley. For me, I call that place healing. I'm still headed there. I'm still on that journey. And so that was a moment of grief processing for me. It was putting all of those pieces together. Sometimes it was tied to just the weirdest things, specific smells, specific meals, specific songs that I used to listen to with my dad. Sometimes I would hear a song and there was a lyric that really spoke to me. And when I would put the song on, that would trigger the grief response. And eventually it got to a point where I realized that this is something that's actually healthy. This is not bad. It doesn't feel good. There's a lot of crying, the jaw clenching and just you're sobbing and your stomach hurts, and it's so hard. But each time that you allow yourself to release this, you're one step closer to healing. And now I can say, earlier on today, I had a moment. I had to go in my bedroom and I had to cry for 5 minutes. And it kind of came out of nowhere, but it was these days though, those crying sessions and those fits are much shorter. They don't last as long, and they're not anywhere near as intense. They were really, really intense in the beginning. And then slowly but surely, it started to become something that was a lot more manageable. So does that make sense?
Oh, it makes all the sense in the world to me.
Yeah. You
Yes.
probably went through something really similar, I would guess.
Oh my gosh. Looking back, I'm like, why did I love the movie Madeline? Like, why did I love the book Madeline? Like this
Yeah.
girl living with a
Mhm.
bunch of other girls.
Yep.
Why did I love the movie Matilda? The girl
Yep.
who is abused by her parents and then gets
Yep.
magically adopted by a loving mother. Like, and it all makes sense now. Yes, I completely see it. I understand.
Yeah, there was this thing, one thing that my dad and I used to do when I was on visitation with him is, he took me to see a lot of movies. He would take me to see a lot of movies in theaters. And I went back and I was, this is so funny. I was pulling up like what were the top 50 movies in 1991? And I was going down the list and I was like, okay, yep, I remember he took me to see that one. He took me to see that one. He took me to see that one. And then late at night after the kids would go to sleep, I would sit in front of the TV and I would watch a movie that my dad and I had. And it was stupid stuff that I had not, like White Fang 2, who goes back and watches White Fang 2? I did, because my dad went and took me to see that movie in theaters. And so that was really healing in and of itself, reliving some of those moments in time, so.
Yeah, I love that. That actually brings us right to step number 4, which I think is going to be a more uplifting step to talk
Yes.
about, which is reconnecting with the parent that you have rejected unjustifiably.
Yes.
So to begin, how did you approach your dad after rejecting him for so many years without true justification? And did you have any fears going into that reconnection?
Yes. It was hard because, suddenly all the pieces were there.
Mhm.
And I realized the darkness that we had been through together. And that was really the thing that scared me the most was, wow, okay, this was some really, really, really evil stuff that we went through together. And I was not afraid of him rejecting me. I knew that he wouldn't. And that's a really important message for any child or any adult survivor. If you are in that stage where you're thinking about reconnecting with that parent,
Mhm.
They want you back. They want you back. Parents don't reject their kids. They don't, not really, in the same way that children don't really reject their parents. It's just not in our DNA to do that. We are a relationally dependent species. Somebody said that. I can't remember who. But it's built into our DNA to depend on those family relationships. And so, when I reconnected with my dad, it was incredible. There really was just nothing but love. He knew about a lot of the things that had happened. He didn't know how bad it had actually been. Like when I started to tell him about some of those things, he was like, Kevin, I'm not ready to hear this. You're my little boy. I'm not ready to hear this. And I said, Dad, it was really bad. But I said it in the first interview that we did, and I'll say it again. In reconnecting with my dad, we were the healing that we both needed.
Mhm.
I helped him heal in the best way possible, and he helped me heal in the best way possible. And again, I'm shamelessly ripping off Craig Childress here, but he talks about how in reunification therapy, the key to healing the child is to allow the child to do what the child wants to do, which is to bond with their parent. That's what they want to do. And the minute that you allow them to do that, that's when the healing begins. The grief response activates in the right place, and everything just kind of falls into place.
Mhm.
So for me, that was probably the most important step was reconnecting with my dad. Sometimes I do a lot of what ifing with myself. What if he had died? He was 81
Mhm.
when I reconnected with him. And that's where, even in the darkest points in this journey, I can thank God that it happened, because I was able to reconnect with him while he was still on this planet. And so I'm deeply, deeply thankful for that.
I'm curious to know, I'm just curious to know how long so you figured out everything out. How long did it take from your light bulb moment to before you contacted your dad?
About 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay.
It was about 2 weeks. Yeah. I wanted to make sure that I was in the right frame of mind to talk to him. And what was interesting about it is that there was an aunt that I spoke to first, my dad's sister, and she and we were never close, actually. She was kind of one of these people that would always kind of hound me to, talk to your dad, and she would give me a hard time when I didn't. And so I called her up and I said, Aunt Adrena, I got to tell you some stuff. And I threw and I said, does he even want to talk to me? And she said, you
Mhm.
call your dad. Your father loves you. So I kind of had that test case first, but it was about 2 weeks, and it started with a phone call, and then pretty quickly, about 2 weeks later, after that, I got on a plane in the middle of a blizzard, flew down to Kansas City to see him. I just embraced him with open arms, spent a lot of time with him, and then went down to the land of my childhood, climbed back into the cabin, found all the old pictures, that whole spiel.
Yeah. That's in the
That
first interview. I would encourage everybody, sorry for interrupting. I just
no,
have
you're
to
good.
say, please go watch the full interview with Kevin after this. It is just such a beautiful story, that moment
Yeah.
you're describing.
Yeah, well, and one of the most healing things that my dad actually said to me, and we just talked, I think it was 2 days ago, and the way the conversation ended, it wasn't a long conversation. A lot of our conversations they're not all that long. It's just
Mhm.
kind of, hey, love you, Dad, how you doing? Because we've already kind of gone over all the stuff that happened in the past, and now we're on to, what's happening now.
Mhm.
But we had talked for 10, 12 minutes, just about everyday stuff, and then right before I hung up, he said, son, I am so proud of you. And it was just, and then it was, oh my gosh, I started crying, and he's like, what are you blubbering for all the time? It's like, well, it means that I'm making it, in spite of all this crap, I'm making it. My dad's proud of me. So.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Your dad seems like a really awesome guy and smart too.
Yeah, he's too smart for his own good.
So number 5, you mentioned reconnecting with places where significant memories took place.
Yes. So one of the things that happens in trauma, and I learned about this a lot in therapy, is that there's a part of your brain that actually gets frozen in time. There's a
Hmm.
part of your brain that gets locked up in that particular place and wherever the trauma happened. And one thing for me that was really, really helpful in bringing my brain up to speed and bringing it out of that traumatized state was to go back to places where things had happened, to allow myself to stand in those places, to smell the smells, to observe the sights, and to see how those places either were the same or had changed. And I did that a lot. When I went back to see my dad, one of the things that I did was I not only did I go back to the land of my childhood and the cabin and all those things, but I grew up in Missouri, in St. Louis, in Kansas City, and in Columbia. And I lived in a bunch of different houses while I was there. And I went to every single house that I had ever lived in. I just drove by and just kind of walked down the sidewalk to experience the sidewalks that I had walked down as a kid while all this was going on. There's even in Columbia, there's an old building that at one point was the Department of Family Services. And that's where the supervised visitations with my dad were originally arranged. And I went back to that place. Now, the building looked completely different, but it was still in the same place. And I just stood in the parking lot and observed. Went inside. It was kind of in a little, not quite a shopping mall, but like an outlet center kind of. And I went in and just sort of walked around a little bit and looked here and there. There was a lot of that went on, and I'm not even sure why that was so healing, but it really was. I think it has something to do with that helped bring my brain up to speed, reliving some of those same places, but seeing them now as an adult, no longer as a child. Seeing and experiencing those things helped kind of, bring my brain back online. That's the expression that the rabbi uses, bring my brain back online. And so I would encourage anybody, if you've got specific places that are associated either with good memories or with bad, one of the things that I had to embrace is that a trigger is not a bad thing. Triggers are not bad. Triggers are your body's way of signaling something to you, that there's something in this place that I wouldn't necessarily say you haven't dealt with, but there's something here that you need to explore. There's a memory that's here that you need to come to terms with. There's something here that you need to make peace with. And so when you experience those triggers, if you go to a specific place that's associated with a bad memory, you start to feel that trigger, wherever you feel it, the pain in your stomach, you start to feel anxious, you start to feel overwhelmed, sad, whatever it happens to be. Allow yourself to feel that. Feel it fully. Don't run away from that. Don't automatically go to, okay, I got to regulate myself now. No. Like, let yourself feel this. I mean, you'll feel relief, I promise, if you do this. And that helps too to just bring the brain back up to speed. So.
Mm-hmm. So for you, revisiting all the places from your childhood brought maybe some closure, resolution, instead of re-traumatizing you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it re-traumatized me. No, there were places that were triggering for sure, but in that trigger, I was able to say, you're not that kid anymore. You actually have the power to walk away from this place if you want to. You can do that. You reclaim your autonomy. You reclaim your ability to change your environment, your ability to change your situation.
It makes so much sense, because when your brain is frozen in that trauma, in that place and time, your brain still thinks it's that age. Yep. So when you revisit that place where it's frozen, you can tell that part of your brain, hey, I'm 30, I'm 40 now. Like, you're okay. You're not stuck here. It makes so much sense.
Yep.
I actually had the urge to do that too. And I was a little too scared to visit some of the places, so I didn't do it. But maybe the next time I'm in North Carolina, I should. Yeah.
You should do it. Yep.
So your sixth step is one that is rather heavy, but necessary. And that's grieving the quote unquote death, or in your case, actual death, but also the death of the parent you thought you had, the parent who had abused you and manipulated you for years or decades. And I guess I'll just start off with a question. What are you actually grieving? The loss of the relationship, the loss of the potential, or the loss of the parent you thought you had, the loss of safety? What do you think we are actually grieving?
I think it's a little bit of all of that, and maybe a little bit more. And so when you go through this loss type grief, you're actually grieving the loss of two parents. You're grieving the loss of the parent that you were alienated from. Even though that parent may still be living, the reality is that there are huge chunks of time that you were robbed of. There were experiences, life events that I had that my dad really should have been involved in, that he was not able to be involved in because we were alienated from each other. And I had to grieve that. But more so, when you force a kid to cut a parent out of their life, it's the same thing as a death. You're telling them this parent is dead to you. So you have to grieve that. It's a death, even if that parent is still living. Now, the alienating parent is much more complex. And for me, that was difficult, and that went through a lot of different stages. And so in the beginning, what I realized pretty quickly on is that I had some feelings of great affection for my father that were deeply, deeply repressed. But I also had some feelings of just flat out rage for my mother that were also deeply, deeply, deeply repressed. And I had to get that out. And I did. I mean, that for me, there was a lot of writing. I wrote her letters that I knew I was never going to send because she was dead. I went in my car and I would scream myself hoarse. But eventually, when you start to use your thinking brain, when you kind of come out of that emotion and you start to think rationally about the experience, my mother was mentally ill.
Right.
That was what my mom's problem was. My mom was mentally ill. My mom had a number of different pathologies going on, and she lived a life that was wrought with suffering. She was a person that was suffering. She was a person that was in pain. And when I started to think about her that way, I realized that I could not hate her.
Mm-hmm.
I could be angry with her behaviors, but I couldn't hate her as a person, because the pathologies of my mom are no more my mom than the pathologies that I struggle with are me. I struggle with PTSD as a result of all of this, but that's not me. That's something that happened as a result of what was done to me. That's not me. And so deep down inside, I do believe that my mother was a good person. That's hard for me to say. That's hard to sometimes say, because so much of our relationship was wrapped up in these really, really destructive behaviors, abusive behaviors. And we need to be able to call it that. My mother abused me. My mother was not a bad person. And I can hold those two things in tandem with each other. Once I got to that point and I started to realize that there was a much bigger picture here going on. My mother was raised in a day and age where, if we're, I'll say it, these days we're in like the dark ages of mental health. We are just coming out of the dark ages of mental health. But if we're coming out of that now, then what were things like in the 1960s when my mom grew up and she was developing a sense of self? Like, poor girl, poor girl. Oh my gosh. There were all kinds of things going on. And my grandparents, my family, the doctors back then, the counselors, they weren't equipped to deal with this. And so my mother, in her own way, was actually a victim of all of that. And so when I started to think about her that way, I began to have a great deal of empathy for her. And in that sense, I was grieving potential. I was grieving the mother that she could have actually been to me, and in rare moments was to me. But she could have been so much more. But because of this horrible mental illness that she had, she was not able to be. And that was what I had to grieve, you know, and I forgave my mom. I can say wholeheartedly these days, I don't hate her. I can actually say that I love her, even though she didn't return that love in the way that I would have liked. I don't think my mother was really capable of real, true, genuine bonding type love, but it wasn't her fault. It was because of, you know, her own trauma and her own things that she had going on. She never really learned how. She didn't know how to do that. She didn't know how to bond to people, you know, and so she just wasn't able to love me in the way that I needed her to. But I can forgive her for that because at the end of the day, that's, you know, it really wasn't her fault, you know, so.
Well, that skips forward a little bit to your 8th point, which is to humanize and forgive the alienating parent.
Yeah.
So what does forgiveness mean to you in this context? What does it mean to forgive your mom?
So I'm a preacher by trade, so I have to do a little bit of preaching here, so forgive me of that.
Okay.
But when I went to seminary to become a pastor, I had to learn Greek and I had to learn Hebrew so that I could learn how to read the Bible in its original language. And one thing that was really interesting is when I started to read Greek and I started to read the words of Jesus in the New Testament in the original Greek, when he uses the word forgive, the word is aphiemi, and the word actually means to let go. And I remember reading that and thinking, okay, to let go, like to let go of what? And then of all people, the person that actually made it make sense to me is my favorite theologian of all time, Mr. Rogers. And I remember watching that movie with Tom Hanks that they did about Mr. Rogers called A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. It's a wonderful story of forgiveness and family dynamics. But right at the beginning of that movie, Tom Hanks, speaking as Fred Rogers, said something that Fred Rogers actually said, and that is, forgiveness is a conscious decision that we make to release another person from our anger. And when I heard that, I went, whoa, okay. So when God says that he forgives me, he's not angry at me. Like, he's not angry at me at all. Like, there's no anger. There's no wrath of God. He's not angry at me at all. If he says he forgives me, like, he really does. In spite of the fact that I've done some really messed up things, like, he forgives me. You know, wow. He's not angry at me at all. You know, and when I say I forgive myself, that means I'm not angry at myself either. I don't have any anger. I understand the reasons why I may have done some really stupid, regrettable things, but I'm not angry at myself anymore. And then eventually, as I applied that to my mom, it was like, I'm not angry at my mom anymore. I don't want to be angry at her. I'm not angry at her. I love her. And I wish that things would have been different. And I don't love her behavior. I hate her behavior. Her behavior was reprehensible and she abused me. All of that was reprehensible, but that wasn't her. Those were her behaviors. And those behaviors came about for reasons. There were reasons why she exhibited those behaviors. And it's because at the end of the day, she was a suffering person. She was mentally ill, you know? And so I can forgive and even love a person like that. I'm not angry at you, Mom. You were suffering, you know, that's horrible, you know? So I eventually got to that place, and that's really healthy. That's a really healthy place to be in, you know, when you're just not angry anymore. And these days, every once in a while, you know, there are little kind of spurts of anger that do come back, but it really doesn't last, because once you start to think about this in a logical, rational way, it's like, no, she was mentally ill. And that's what I always come back to. She was mentally ill. Okay. So
Yes. I don't like when people say your mom is evil. She's not evil. She's sick.
yeah. Now at the same time, I also want to say, though, that's not justifying her behavior. It's not the same thing. It's not me saying she's mentally ill, therefore what she did is okay. What she did was horrible and reprehensible and abusive and awful. That we can say, but we can hold those two things in tandem. We don't have to be all black and white about this. Okay. It's like, on one hand, I can say these behaviors are absolutely reprehensible and horrible and terrible. And at the other hand, I can say, but my mom was a good person and I loved my mom dearly. And she had moments of clarity, not very many of them, but we had things that we did connect on. We had moments when she did actually act like a mom towards me. And even when you study the alienation dynamic, the motivations behind what the parent is doing, they're often motivated by a false belief that they have to protect their child. It's a false belief. It is a false belief. It's a delusion, but they believe that firmly, that I must protect my children from the danger. They believe that. And it's like, okay, you were trying to be a good mom. You didn't do it the right way. That was awful. But the motivation that was there, it was coming from kind of this protective instinct. And so you just have to think about it in a more nuanced way. And once you start to do that, if you hold on to anger, it'll eat you alive. I believe that firmly,
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm at the same place that you are. I don't really feel angry towards my mom, and I do forgive her now. And I love her. I pity her even. I feel, or have compassion, I would say, for what she went through as a child. And we skipped from number 6 to 8, but we didn't mention number 7, which is learning about the dynamic and the mental state of the parent who has done this to you. So what did you learn about the psychological makeup of your alienating parent? And did that lead you to, how did that lead you to more understanding and more empathy?
Yeah. So it kind of came in stages. So in reconnecting with my dad had always suspected that my mom had Munchausen's by proxy. He always suspected that. And it was one of those things where I went back through experiences that I had had with my mother, both in childhood and in adulthood, and put sort of all of the pieces together. And even though she never got like an official diagnosis of this because she had died, it was really obvious. And when I began to talk with my little brother about this, my little brother's name is Kelly. He's 2 years younger than me. We talked a lot about this, and he agreed. He said, yeah, I think mom had Munchausen's. I remember these things too. And so that was kind of the first step. And then I started listening to a lot of lectures and just learning as much as I could about the dynamic from different perspectives. And there were commonalities that I was finding and things that people were saying. Again, I'll preach it from the rooftops. The lectures that Dr. Childress gave were very, very helpful. There's a video that Teal Swan put together. There's a couple of them. Those were very helpful. There's even there was a book. There were a couple of books on complex post-traumatic stress disorder that don't deal directly with parental alienation, but those were really helpful in understanding, as I understood, sort of my own reactions to things and what was going on. That helped me better understand my mom in a weird way, because it's all, at the end of the day, it's all trauma, understanding that. There were a few other YouTube channels too that don't deal directly with parental alienation, but deal with like narcissistic personality disorders. Some of those were really helpful too. And in talking with my own therapist, it was almost like I had to say to him, right now my mom's dead. And so this is all speculative, but these are the behaviors that I saw and that I can confirm. And in your professional opinion, what do you think was going on with her? And he was also able to kind of help me put the pieces together. And so he kind of sent me on the right path there too. So the more I learned about it, the more empathy I had, and just the more sense it made of what I had been experiencing. A kid doesn't just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to start lying about my parent that I actually really love a lot. There are things that make a kid do that. And those are all deeply wired in the attachment system and our survival and all of those things. And so knowledge is power.
Absolutely. I think there is a point where I was like done researching for a while. I was like, this is too much. I learned what I need to know. Out, Maddie, out. But I agree with you. I would recommend Dr. Childress's lectures above anything. I've made videos covering his lectures. The really important things made a lot of sense for me. So number 9 is that you put grieving the loss of the alienating parent. And we kind of touched on that a
Yeah,
bit.
I think that there are two steps that are really similar. One is grieving the loss of the parent that you were alienated from, and the
Mm,
other step is grieving the loss of the parent that alienated you.
okay.
So when you grieve the loss of I already touched on this a little bit, but when you're alienated from a parent, you need to treat that like a death, because that's what it forces a kid to do. When a kid is taught that they have a parent that needs to be systematically rejected from their life, it's the same thing as killing them off mentally. And so the emotions that come with that are still there. They're latent, and you have to allow yourself to process through those. And for me, even going back to the original root of it and grieving the fact that my parents got divorced, I never did that.
Mm,
I never did that as a little kid, and I had to do it. It was like, I lost my family. Wow, that sucked. Like one
mm,
morning I just woke up and my dad was gone, and like we couldn't go to the park anymore, and we couldn't go on the bike anymore, and he couldn't take me to the zoo and the museums, and that sucks. And we're never going to be able to do that again. Wow, that's awful. I had to process all of that, and so I think the overriding message and theme there, we say the word grief a lot, and it comes in stages. There are a lot of stages to this, and you have to let yourself feel all of them, from grieving the loss of the alienating parent, the alienated parent, grieving the time lost, grieving the fact that you were abused, like that what happened to you was wrong, and that you were robbed of years and years and years of experiences and joys and privileges that other kids have in normal family dynamics. You didn't get that. You have to let yourself grieve all of that stuff,
mm.
so it's a long process.
Interesting point. That would not have come to my mind. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause
thank
it
you.
goes back to that misattributed grief response. The
Right.
breakup of a family is sad. It's heartbreaking, and it's heartbreaking for a kid. And in healthy family dynamics, when there is a breakup of a family like that, yeah, I think that's something else that Dr. Childress says. He says the family doesn't go away. The family is transitioning from an intact family to a separated family. And
Mhm.
now what's keeping the family together is the child. That's the commonality. And in order
Mhm.
for the child to serve that role, both parents need to be supportive of the mutual relationship that the kid will have with the other parent. That's what happens in a healthy dynamic,
Mhm.
So
Absolutely. Okay, so number 10, super important. I don't think I've ever heard other child survivors even talk about this together, which is, so we might be like making history here.
yeah.
But identifying false beliefs that you learned about yourself, the
Yes.
world, and others. Reject them and embrace reality.
Yes.
Packed statement. So let's break that down. So what were some of the
Yep.
most damaging beliefs that you held about yourself or others due
Yep.
to the alienation?
There were a lot. So the analogy that I make sometimes is, if you were raised in a dynamic where there was parental alienation going on, you were raised in a household where you were told that the world was flat. And deep down inside, you knew that the world was round, but you weren't allowed to say that. So you had to quack like a duck and say the world is flat. And now you're embracing that the world is round. So for me, there were a lot of them. With the Munchausen's by proxy that my mom had, I was taught from a very early age that in order to be loved, I needed to be damaged. And in order
Mm.
to experience love, I had to be sick. And so I carried that with me into adulthood. And once I began to reject that, I began to see that what that looks like in adulthood is you're always looking for that thing that's wrong with you.
Yeah.
You feel like there must be something about me that's damaged. There must be something about me that's wrong. There must be something about me that needs to be fixed. And you just obsess over it. And deep down inside, it's because you were taught that you are damaged, and that's why I love you, because I'm the only one that can take care of you. I'm the only one that can make you well. I've got the medicine. And so I had to reject that. No, I'm not a damaged person. I'm a good person. I'm a strong person. I'm a resilient person. I'm a conscientious person. I'm a kind person. I think that the language of coping skills is really helpful here, because in family dynamics where needs are met in normal, natural ways, kids develop normal, natural means or coping skills to get their needs met. But in environments where needs are not met in normal ways, kids develop unhealthy mechanisms for getting their needs met. So narcissism is a word that gets thrown around a lot today,
Yeah.
but all narcissism is it's a coping strategy that's learned early in life, for a kid to get their needs met. It's all about me. Nobody's going to take care of me but me, so I got to take care of me. I'm the only one that matters. Nobody else can matter but me. I got to be the center. I got to look out for number one. That's a coping strategy. It's a bad one. It needs to be rejected, but it comes about because the needs of the child are not met in normal ways. I actually read somewhere that when kids are going through dysfunctional family dynamics, they slide either towards narcissism or manipulation in adulthood. That does not mean that they're narcissists, and that does not mean that they're master manipulators. It means that they may have some of those tendencies that they learned. For me, it was manipulation. That's what I slid towards. And so I had to learn that, no, actually, you can stand up for yourself. Like, you actually have a right to a space. And if you want something, you can actually ask for it. You don't have to like beat around the bush or try to, even, be deceptive about it. Just ask for what you want. You're in a safe place. You can do that. That was another one, sort of rejecting the manipulation tactics that my mom had taught me. Another one that this was one I learned from my mother, and it came from the way that she treated me. People are a means to an end. People matter only to the extent that they can serve you. No, people matter because people matter. People matter because people have inherent worth. People matter because life is sacred. Embrace that instead. So that one goes out the window. I'm going to love people for the fact that they're people. They don't have to do anything for me, Black and white thinking. People are either all good or all bad. That was a huge one. When you're raised to believe that you have one good parent and one bad parent, that sets the tone for your whole life. People are good or bad. No, they're not. In the narratives of our lives, there are no villains and there are no heroes. There are just people who do things. And people do things for a wide variety of very complex reasons. Sometimes nominally good people with good intentions do very bad things. Sometimes people that are kind of shady surprise you and do something really good, The black and white, that kind of went away on its own, though. That was interesting. That one just kind of faded into the background, where suddenly I realized, no, actually, like, two things can be true at the same time, and I can hold two things in tandem. That came about full circle when it came to forgiving my mom, So the black and white thinking, that's another big one. There's a lot more that's there, but it's just identifying the lie. What was the lie that you were fed? And then what did you do in response to that lie? And what do you want to do differently? What's the truth? And then how do you live according to the truth? Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. And then maybe making a list of your values, or really, really determining what your own personal values are. I'm curious about one other thing too.
Yeah.
Did you, in the first few months after this awakening, did you have difficulty trusting yourself to know who and what to trust? Because that was a huge problem for me.
I felt like I was living in the Matrix. I'm not even kidding. I felt like any moment I'm going to wake up and Morpheus is going to be standing in front of me saying, take the blue pill. I really did feel that way. Like, it was the trippiest feeling I have ever felt in my life. It was like, I'm not even sure what's real around me. Like, I don't know. It was a really, really trippy feeling. And that's where talking with other people, I've said it again and again and again, but talking with other people, I will also say that photographs have come to take on a very significant meaning for me. I did this at my office at church. I got the biggest bulletin board I could find, and I went back and I just printed off all of these pictures of like my whole life story. There's pictures of my dad, my mom, my grandparents, my brother, my kids today, my wife, like just all this stuff. And I just stuck it there so that I have this reminder of like, this is what's real. Like, this is your story. This is who you are. The good, the bad, the in between. This is you. So I definitely resonate with that feeling. It is the trippiest feeling in the world. Like what's real around me. But that's where I think other people, photographs, the places, those kinds of things can be really, really, really helpful there.
Yeah. And for me, it wasn't like a good trippy. It was terrible trippy, like panic attack trippy.
Yeah. I get that too. And for me, some of it even came in the form of where it got really unhealthy for me is you start to question every single decision you made in life. Like, do I really believe what I believe? Did I go into the right career?
Yeah.
How many of the decisions that I made were made because I was traumatized and I was living a lie? That was hard. And there was even a moment, I think this was about 5 months in, but I got really, really, really solitary. It was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to go live in a cave somewhere because I don't trust this world anymore. I don't trust our justice system. I don't trust anything. And I actually called a buddy of mine from seminary and we were talking about all of this. And I said, if this is what earthly justice looks like, where an innocent man like my dad can go through all of this, and just because my mom had the money to hire a bunch of lawyers, like this, a kid gets hurt and traumatized. I don't want this. And his response was really interesting. He was kidding when he said this, but he said, well, you may as well just like take yourself out now because that's this world. And you have a choice to make. You can either fall into despair about it, or you can use your experience to make it better. And you have to make that choice. Later, I took that to my rabbi and he said the same thing. He said, you're sent hardships so that you have an opportunity for godliness, so that you have an opportunity to do something good with it. And every single time that you experience evil, you're going to have a choice to make. Are you going to let it absorb you, or are you going to become part of it, or are you going to let your light shine? I'm going to let my light shine. That's what I'm going to do. That's always the better path. And so I definitely resonate with that, though. That's why I said kind of at the beginning, I really do think this might be the most damaging kind of abuse that a kid can endure for precisely that reason. The memories are compromised. Your brain gets all turned around. There's that, you're gaslit for so long and then you start gaslighting yourself because your reality is all turned around. So I definitely resonate with that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all this. I know that people are watching now, but many people are going to rewatch it too down the line.
Yeah.
That are in that first stage of realizing what has happened to them. And I think it'll bring people relief to hear their own experience being talked about, because I couldn't find that when I was going through it.
Yeah, me neither. That's what kind of got me into the space. Was there was a lot of stuff for parents out there, and that's not to minimize what parents are going through. I really hope if there's any parents out there that are watching this, these stages can also be applied to you. What you're going through is traumatizing. So find the therapist, grieve the lost time, do all of those same things. A lot of these steps are really applicable to this as well. Even forgive the alienator, as hard as that is. Find a place where you can do that.
Yeah. And I think along with number 10, the false beliefs, embracing reality, you have to have hope that you will be able to determine what reality is.
Yes.
That it will come with time, that you're not going to be living in this upside down world forever, because you won't be.
Yes.
Number 11, and we're almost going through the whole list.
Yeah.
Number 11, and we mentioned this briefly, but it's to identify negative behaviors and coping strategies you adopted, reject them, and embrace yourself as good and whole. So what were some of the coping mechanisms, if you don't mind talking about it, that you
Sure.
developed as a child that you later realized were hurting you? And how did you learn to trust yourself again and to let go of those coping mechanisms?
Yeah, and so with false beliefs come false actions, is the way that I look at it. If you believe something that's not true and you act according to it, then you're not living truthfully, and so that's going to be a bad behavior that's going to manifest itself somehow. I can talk about a few of these. So, a thing that is common for people with all kinds of trauma, it was described in one of the books that I read as this attitude of hurry up to get nowhere. So, there's this franticness that the brain has where it's like, I'm always moving on to the next thing, and I can't just stop and embrace the present. I can't stop and just embrace life right now. I can't be in the moment. And that was something that I had to learn how to do. And that comes with embracing that you are safe. The first lie that I ever swallowed was the lie that I wasn't safe with my dad. You're not safe with your father. That is a deeply, deeply traumatizing belief for a kid to have, that they're not safe with their dad. And from that springs a whole system of feelings of unsafety. And so you react according to that. Well, what's the truth? You were always safe with your father. Always. Were you ever in danger? No. Your father kept you safe. Your father loved you. So what does that mean about right now? Can you keep yourself safe? Yes, you can. So is this a safe space that you occupy? Can you create that safe place for yourself? Yeah, you can. So what are you in such a hurry for? Stop and enjoy it. Stop and live in that. And so for me, and I think this is number 12, there's 12 steps for anybody keeping track here. But I think number 12 is talking about the strategies. And for me, once I figured out that that was the goal, slow your brain down, slow down this franticness, calm yourself down. Then, okay, meditation. That's really, really helpful. I meditate for an hour every day, and it is the best medicine that you can do. Meditation is awesome. And all it really is, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering, because when I hear meditation, so many things come to mind. What do you do for your meditation? Can you give an example?
You go to the place in your mind where you're not thinking and you're not feeling. Now that sounds impossible, but you can actually do it. And the way that I do it is I find something simple to focus on. And for me, it starts with the breathing. And you have to actually be taught how to breathe. And so it was a trick that my rabbi taught me. Breathe in the nose 4 seconds, breathe out the mouth 6 seconds, and just count that 4, 6, 4, 6, 4, 6. And once I get into that, then pretty quickly I go to a place where it's like, it's hard to describe it. It's just sort of a blank space where I'm not actually thinking about anything, or if I am, I'm not chasing thoughts like rabbits, and I'm just sort of passively receiving. And there are so many benefits to it. I mean, it calms down your nervous system. It allows you to access that higher part of your brain if you're in a traumatized state. Once you get past the feelings which are overwhelming and the thoughts that are overwhelming, you get to something higher than that. I call that the soul. I call it going into the soul. That's what I do. There's sometimes wisdom that comes with that. After meditation, you learn things or you put pieces together. That's kind of cool. But there's a whole bunch of them too, though, that, meditation, journaling, exercise. I listened to this really good TED talk about exercise the other day where the guy said, if exercise were a pill and all you had to do was take it every day, it would be the most widely selling prescription in the United States because of all the benefits that come from exercising just 30 minutes a day. It's all you have to do. For me, it's something as simple as just getting out and going for a walk, something like that. It can be very, very, very simple. And it's sort of this really cool sort of domino effect that starts to happen. Once you embrace one, you realize, you've got actually, I've got 6 shots in the chamber. So if I'm having a bad day and this one doesn't work, I can pull out something else and do that instead, so.
Yeah. Mine personally tends to be exercise.
Yeah.
If I'm ever having a bad day or being pulled into the traumatized state, I go for a run, and I always 100% of the time feel better than when I started.
Yeah. Now, and go ahead. No, well, and for me, I gotta plug this too. My biggest passion outside of doing ministry in my family is falconry, is working with birds of prey. And for me, there's something very, very, very therapeutic about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why it is, except for the fact that it just demands so much of your attention, and so much about the way that a hawk communicates with you is very subtle. So you have to pay attention to what you're doing so that you don't get hurt and so that he doesn't get hurt. And that for me became just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful form of therapy. For some people, I'm a little nuts. So for some people, go get a dog, and start working with a dog, or go take horseback riding lessons, or just whatever it is for you, whatever it is that makes you feel more alive, do that. And do more of that, because you deserve it. You deserve good things. You were taught as a child that you couldn't have that space, that you couldn't be you. Yeah, you can, and you should. You're a good you, so go be you.
Yeah, awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to add? I have a few more questions, but is there anything else that you'd like to add on those 12 steps?
I'm a work in progress. That's the biggest thing. I think at the very, very end, I think I wrote like to be continued.
Yeah.
Because for me, this is just sort of my first stab at this. And I might, after doing this for another year, come back and go, holy cow, I missed like 19 other steps, and I need to like go write a book or something about this. This is just the path that I followed, and it worked. It was really incredible. And I'll say that just the amount of healing that I've experienced in the last almost 12 months has been absolutely unreal. The clarity of thought that I have now is like nothing I've experienced. The way that I'm able to move and experience life in a way that's calm and deliberate. My sleep is better. My habits are better. My thinking patterns are better. It's really an incredible thing. And so I think that if I'm going to add a last step, it's that you're a work in progress. You're not done. So embrace that. Embrace that every day is an opportunity to put something good out into the world, and to take something that, while incredibly tragic, can actually be used for good. That's what you're doing, Maddie. That's your mission. That's what you're doing. And so I support it.
Well, you too being here.
Yeah.
So hang on with us, because we're going to do a short Q&A at the end, but I have 2 questions before we get into the Q&A. But in the meantime, please leave your questions for Kevin and I. Me and Kevin. That's the proper usage.
Is that
there.
grammatically correct?
Yes. For me and Kevin in the chat. So I have 2 questions. The first one is, what is the most surprising thing that you have discovered about yourself in this process? Putting you on the spot a little bit.
I'm a lot more open-minded than I thought. It's I can actually embrace many different perspectives and see validity in all of them. Another one that is maybe a little bit more practical, not so ethereal, is my memory actually does work, and I don't have ADHD. I can actually remember things pretty well, and that part of my brain actually does work. I think my wife appreciates that one a lot. I know the staff that I work with do, because it's that my memory actually works. You're not crazy. There's not a part of you that's missing. It's just it got messed up there for a minute, and now you're back online. It works. So
that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And my last question: if your inner child could hear you now, what would you say to them?
I'm always going to keep you safe.
That's beautiful.
Yep.
I love that so much. Okay, so now we're going to get into a short Q&A. Let's see here. I was trying to star some questions as we went on.
How many did we get, just out of curiosity?
Questions?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't see a number of the
Oh,
chat.
okay.
My platform isn't showing me like a number or anything like that. But I noticed some questions and some were answered as we were talking. So someone says a very serious question. Talking, I'll put it on the screen. Talking about fault and blame. Is it weird for me to blame society for cowering when they should have stood up for a child? Your alienator is sick, not evil. They all stood by.
Yeah. I think that, well, that is a really, really, really heavy question.
Yeah.
And thank you for asking it. My background is theology, so that's where I tend to approach things from that perspective. And if you go back through the narrative of the Bible, every problem that we're dealing with now came about because humanity embraced a lie, which was actually the same lie that I embraced, which was that your father can't be trusted. You're not safe with your father. Your father can't be trusted. And because of that, we have many, many, many societal ills and things like that. And so the solution for that is to start living truthfully, to wake up, to become sane, to embrace reality. And I think that trauma, as much as it is an individualized thing, it's also a societal thing. I very much believe in generational trauma and institutional trauma. I think that places and organizations can experience trauma. There's kind of this ripple effect that happens. And so I don't use the word blame, though. I don't like that word. I don't think blaming gets anybody anywhere. I think that there can be valid reasons why things happened. And yeah, I was brought up in a day and age where the court systems were completely in the dark about a lot of this. The wool was pulled over a lot of people's eyes. There was money involved. There were lawyers involved. I could get real bitter and I could say, wow, what a bunch of scumbags, but at the same time, that's the system, and the system is flawed because the system is put together by human beings who are also flawed. And so as I look at that, my answer is not to blame, but to do my own part to make it better. And I think that more voices are powerful, and the more of us that come together and say, no, we're sick of living the lie. We're going to live truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where it starts. And there's power in numbers. We've got a few really good things on our side. You've got the truth, you've got compassion, you've got healing. Those are very, very powerful things that have their origin, I believe, in God. And so if you're on the side of truth, you're on the side of God. And so you can't really lose. It might take a long time, but you're not going to lose. So
great answer. Great question. Thank you, Mark.
Very good question.
We have another question from Mark, and I'm going to play it. It's a short question. Were you ever told that your father needed professionals supervising him for your safety?
I got to think back to that, because the supervised visitations were pretty early on, but then they repeated when I was a teenager because of some of the things that I was saying. So I think that my mother was, one thing that you find about alienation dynamics is that it's a lot more subtle than just coming out and saying you are in danger when you're with your father. There's an attitude, and their tone of voice is a lot. If the child says or gives the wrong response, then there might be an uptick in the alienating parent's anxiety, and so the kid reacts to that. I don't ever remember being told that the reason why there was a supervisor there was because my dad was unsafe. I don't remember ever hearing that. But as I got older, that's what I was told, that was what was going on then. So now I could have very well been told that. I just don't remember it. So.
I don't see too many other questions.
Yep.
But I think we covered a lot of good stuff here. And I'm really glad that we had this conversation focused on healing and what the child goes through. Because you're right, most of the stuff online is geared towards parents.
Yep.
And we're trying to change that so that the kids going through it have a place to land and a place to feel like their experience is valid too.
That's right.
Oh, Andrea has a question. Okay, Andrea
Yeah,
is my friend, and she is also a former alienated child.
Sure.
She says, what if the alienating parent or co-alienating family members believe that they have healed, but they've really only externalized the situation at hand or have identified pathological symptoms?
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand the question, because there's this is pretty technical, but I think what this is asking is, what if the parent that's doing the alienating or other family members that have been kind of roped into this delusion believe that they've seen the light, but they've really only identified the issues and they're still acting in accordance with those pathological symptoms. So in other words, they may have identified the problem, but they're not, they haven't fully embraced the solution, or they're not acting upon it. They're still embracing old behaviors. Do I understand that question right? Is that kind of what it's asking?
I think that you're understanding it right. She says yes.
Okay. That would be a really, really, really challenging situation, and it's not one that I really have a lot of experience with, honestly, because my mom never ever got to a place where she believed that she had healed. Oh, heck no! My mom thought she was perfect. That she did not ever in her lifetime embrace any of this, and her family members suspected a lot of it, but they didn't have the language to describe what it was. I remember when I spoke with one of my aunts about this, she said, Kevin, don't hate your mom. She was so broken. That was how she said it. She was so broken, you know? So I think in a situation like this, that is a really, really, really hard situation. You know, you kind of wish that you could force people to embrace the solutions and to embrace the coping strategies and healing strategies that they need to get over the pathological symptoms. But there's this thing called free will, unfortunately. So people have the freedom of choice, and that's the really scary thing about this world that we live in, is that people have the choice to do good or to do evil, and not everybody makes the right choice. Not everybody. That's why I think so few narcissists ever come to terms with the fact that, wow, I was actually a traumatized kid. You know, I mean, maybe it'll happen someday, but it's just really good therapists involved who are who don't beat around the bush. Go hire Dr. Childress if you can. He seems like a pretty blunt guy, you know. So I don't know. That's a hard one.
Yeah, that's difficult because they might have the delusion that they've healed. New delusion to deal with.
Exactly.
I feel for you, Andrea. Thank you for your question. We appreciate all the people being here tonight in this live chat. Thank you so much for spending time with us tonight. If tonight's conversation has resonated with you in any way or made you think about things that you haven't considered before, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Also, drop a comment below and let us know what part of this conversation hit you the hardest, or what you took from our conversation tonight. One thing we've learned is that you don't need permission to start your healing journey. You don't need your story to be validated by the people who hurt you in order to heal. And if any part of this conversation tonight resonated with you, I hope that it planted a seed, maybe a seed of curiosity or courage, maybe grief that's ready to be expressed. But please remember that you're not broken, and you're not too late, and you're not alone. And I hope to be continuing these conversations. And I invite you to share your story if you are a child survivor. If and when you're ready, you can reach out to me by email. Until then, please be gentle with yourself and know that healing is not only possible, but it's your birthright and you deserve it. And Kevin, special thank you so much for coming on the channel again to share your wisdom, share your story and your experience. It's always great to have you here. You're a very, very powerful voice, and I appreciate your presence. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Yep. See you later.